Warrior Lore. Chapter 598. Slap. There was a wave of profound chi, and the aura was overbearing. Then, a crisp sound of a slap was heard. Immediately after, Zhang Mingzhou, who was still overjoyed, felt a burning sensation on his face, as if he had been scalded by a pair of fire tongs. At the same time, Zhang Mingzhou even felt that the left side of his face had been smashed. A huge force landed on his face like a thunderbolt. Puffed. His teeth loosened, and blood was spat out along with his teeth. Zhang Mingzhou did not even have the time to scream before his body was sent flying. He was like a kite with a broken string. He flew dozens of feet away, and then landed heavily on the square, causing the ground to shake. Ah! When Zhang Mingzhou landed on the ground, he let out a miserable cry. Blood dripped from the corner of his mouth, and half of his face was already swollen like a pig's head. His face, which was already fat, was now swollen like a super big bun. The surroundings suddenly became quiet. It was a dead silence. All of the surrounding young men and women, including Zhou Yinger, could clearly see that when faced with Zhang Mingzhou, who was at the peak of the Nirvana realm and the Martial Lord realm, the purple-robed young man only raised his hand and sent Zhang Mingzhou flying with a simple slap. He sent Zhang Mingzhou flying with a single slap. It was a simple and clean move. As disciples of the ancient heaven sect, how could they be simple? Even if they were not inner sect disciples, they were still geniuses in the outside world. Naturally, they knew how strong the strength was needed to send Zhang Mingzhou flying with a slap. To do this, it was definitely not something that could be done simply by being slightly stronger than Zhang Mingzhou. Even those at the peak of the complete martial lord realm would find it difficult to do so. But now, the purple-robed young man in front of them had done it. Moreover, he had done it so casually and cleanly. Zhang Mingzhou crawled up and covered half of his face. The almost invisible gaze on his swollen face was filled with shock and fear. Then, it was filled with hatred and resentment. At this moment, Zhang Mingzhou's mood was completely different from before. It was as if he had fallen from heaven to hell. Originally, Zhang Mingzhou wanted to show off in front of the beauty, but he did not expect to be humiliated instead. Everything was ruined, so how could he just let it go? Brat, just you wait. I won't let you go. Just you wait. Zhang Mingzhou covered his face with his hand as blood dripped from his mouth. Then, he turned around and left. As for making a move, Zhang Mingzhou naturally did not dare to do so. Although he was resentful, it did not mean that he was a fool. The other party was able to send him flying with a single slap. The other party's strength was already there for all to see. If Zhang Mingzhou were to make a move, he would only be asking for humiliation. Seeing Zhang Mingzhou leave, the dozen or so youths from the Crouching Tiger Society looked at each other. None of them dared to stay behind. Immediately, they retreated and left. They were afraid that when the purple-robed youth was in a bad mood, he would slap each of them. Zhou Yinger didn't know if she was frightened or shocked, but her bright eyes were a little dazed. Du Xiaofu did not pay attention to the astonished and frightened gazes around him. He walked toward the school affairs office's window and said to the 28 or 29-year-old youth, "I'm a new disciple. I'm here to receive my badge and sect plate." Inside the window, the 28 or 29-year-old youth looked at Du Xiaofu. After being shocked for a while, he recovered and immediately asked Du Xiaofu, "What's your name? How old are you? Are you a martial cultivator or a spiritual symbol master? If you're a martial cultivator, you'll receive medicinal pills to strengthen your profound chi and other necessities every month. As for spiritual symbol masters, they'll receive medicinal pills to strengthen their spiritual soul strength and other necessities." The school affairs office's responsibility did not include getting to the bottom of things. Although the Manchu was not recruiting new disciples, this youth was a little curious as to why someone would come to receive their sect plate and badge at this time. However, since the person was already in the Manchu, there was naturally a reason. This was not under the jurisdiction of this youth. Naturally, there was no need for him to continue asking. It would not be good if he offended someone behind the scenes. To be able to enter the sect at this time, one had to have some relationship with someone in the Manchu. "My name is Du Xiaofu. I'm not even 18 yet. I'm a spiritual symbol master." Du Xiaofu raised his eyebrows and replied, "Between a martial cultivator and a spiritual symbol master, The latter would receive medicinal pills to strengthen their spiritual soul strength and other necessities every month. Du Xiaofu naturally did not hesitate to choose a spiritual symbol master. Originally, Du Xiaofu wanted to say that he was not only a spiritual symbol master, but also a martial cultivator. However, when the words reached his mouth, he swallowed them back down. He felt that it would not be good to be too high profile. Hearing Du Xiaofu's words, the young man raised his head and looked at Du Xiaofu again in surprise. Du Xiaofu's aura that sent Zhang Mingzhou flying with a slap didn't seem like a talisman master. Okay, your information has been registered. This is your badge and sect token. Drip your spiritual soul strength, and you will be able to activate them. If there's anything you don't understand, just ask your senior brothers and sisters. After the youth finished speaking, he handed over the ancient Heaven Sect's badge and an antique jade token. The engravings on them flickered with a gentle luster. Many thanks. Du Xiaofu took the badge and sect token and put them away. Then he turned around and looked around. Finally, he asked the youth behind him, "May I ask how to get to the Tianmu Peak?" The youth looked to be in his 20s. He was very thin and not very tall. He looked a little sallow and emaciated. If it wasn't for the fact that cultivators didn't need to eat much after reaching a certain level of cultivation, people might even suspect that he had been abused by the ancient Heaven Sect and didn't have enough to eat. The youth looked at Du Xiaofu. On his thin face, there was a hint of shock in his clear eyes. Then he smiled, wanting to get closer to Du Xiaofu. He said, "This new junior brother, do you not know how to get to the Tianmu Peak? I'll take you there." Didn't you have to line up to get your daily necessities from the Manchu? Du Xiaofu was puzzled. After he left, it was this guy's turn to line up. The thin youth was very enthusiastic. He pulled Du Xiaofu's hand and left. He said, "It's okay. It's the same if I come tomorrow. I'll take you to the Tianmu Peak first." Du Xiaofu couldn't say anything else. He could only follow the thin youth. Zhou Yinger stood there in a daze. A few young men stood behind her and looked at Du Xiaofu's back. Their bodies were trembling. "So he's called Du Xiaofu. He's a spiritual talisman master. He's not even 18, but he's already so powerful. It's really unbelievable. He's probably comparable to those guys in the inner sect." Zhou Yinger looked at the back of the youth with a broadsword on his back as he left. After a long time, a trace of coldness flashed in her bright eyes. She bit her red lips and said softly, "You dare to treat me like this? I'll definitely not let you off. There will be a day when it'll be too late for you to regret it." Within the ancient Heaven Sect, Du Xiaofu was led to the Tianmu Peak by the enthusiastic thin youth. Along the way, Du Xiaofu learned a lot about the ancient Heaven Sect from the enthusiastic thin youth. From the thin youth, Du Xiaofu learned that the thin youth was called Gu Zhangyu. In the Manchu, he was known as the Skinny Monkey. He was also a spiritual talisman master. However, his main cultivation was Alchemy Talisman Master, and his secondary cultivation was Weapon Talisman Master. However, for some unknown reason, Gu Zhangyu's talent was mediocre. Although he was an Alchemy Talisman Master, he didn't have many achievements in alchemy. It was said that even though he was a 5-star mysterious realm cultivator, he often made mistakes when refining spiritual grade elixirs. If it weren't for his identity as a spiritual talisman master, Gu Zhangyu wouldn't even be able to become an outer sect disciple of the ancient Heaven Sect. From Gu Zhangyu, Du Xiaofu learned that the ancient Heaven Sect was roughly divided into 2 regions, the inner sect region and the outer sect region. There were countless outer sect disciples in the ancient Heaven Sect. They were spread across many places in the Central Plains. Naturally, there were even more places under the ancient Heaven Sect's control. However, the number of young outer sect disciples who stayed in the ancient Heaven Sect was much smaller. There were only about 100,000 of them. There were more than 100,000 outer sect disciples in the younger generation. This number was enough for Du Xiaofu to be flabbergasted. Any outer sect disciple was a genius in the outside world. However, there were so many of them in the ancient Heaven Sect. However, the number of inner sect disciples in the ancient Heaven Sect was much smaller. It was said that every year, the ancient Heaven Sect would select a few outer sect disciples to become inner sect disciples. The ancient Heaven Sect had a total of 8 assessment sites. In each site, Less than 100 people would be selected to become inner sect disciples. Those who had outstanding results would be taken in by the elders and experts in the sect. They would be heavily nurtured. However, out of the 100,000 outer sect disciples every year, less than 800 would have a chance to become inner sect disciples. There wasn't even a 1% chance. This was enough to show how difficult it was. As for outer sect disciples, they only had 2 chances to take the assessment in their lifetime. After that, they would never be able to become inner sect disciples. Junior brother Du Xiaofu, the person you beat up today is someone from the Crouching Tiger Society. You have to be careful in the future. The people from the Crouching Tiger Society are not to be trifled with. They definitely won't let you off easily. Gu Zhangyu explained the situation in the Ancient Heaven sect while reminding Du Xiaofu to be wary of the Crouching Tiger Society. What's the background of the Crouching Tiger Society? Is it very strong? The contents of the new volume, Ancient Heaven Ming Yang. Originally, the contents of the first few chapters should have been divided into volumes. However, I've been thinking about how to better write the contents of this volume. This is also the beginning of the Central Plains. Today, I finally came up with the outline of this volume. Shall you continue to write? Chapter 599. What's the background of the Crouching Tiger Society? Is it very strong? Du Xiaofu smiled faintly. From their conversation, he had a good impression of this enthusiastic Gu Zhangyu. Actually, this Gu Zhangyu was only 18 years old. It was just that he was too thin and his face was sallow from hunger. He looked very old, like he was 20 years old. You just entered the Ancient Heaven sect, so naturally you don't know. Gu Zhangyu looked at Du Xiaofu and didn't find it strange. He patiently and carefully explained, there are many outer sect disciples, so naturally, there are many big and small factions. Many disciples form factions, and there are many benefits involved in this. For example, the sale of pills, spiritual weapons, practitioner weapons, and so on. After pausing for a moment, Gu Zhangyu licked his dry lips and continued. As it relates to the benefits of the Tao, the various factions are constantly fighting. In this kind of competition, many factions have grown stronger. Among them, the Crouching Tiger Society is not weak. That Zheng Mingzhou you beat up, his brother Zheng Zhizhou, became an inner sect disciple not long ago. It's said that the actual leader of the Crouching Tiger Society is a fellow on the inner sect's bronze ranking called Yu Tianyo. Manchu disciples forming factions, does the Manchu not care? Du Xiaofu asked in surprise. According to what Gu Zhangyu said, there was another underworld within the Ancient Heaven sect. The Manchu naturally won't care. This is the tradition of the Ancient Heaven sect. Some factions in the Manchu have even been passed down for many generations. Gu Zhangyu said to Du Xiaofu, in any case in the Manchu, as long as no lives are lost, the elders, protectors, and deacons all turn a blind eye. Of course, there are some things that have to be considered. You will slowly understand in the future. Looks like the Ancient Heaven sect is really a little special. Du Xiaofu was a little surprised. It seemed that the Ancient Heaven sect had acquiesced to this situation in the hope that more experts would emerge in the competition. Only true experts would be able to stand out and stand out. Many people thought that the disciples of some large sects were like flowers in a greenhouse. They only relied on rich resources to become experts. Little did he know that to be able to become a large sect, how could the experts inside be short-sighted? How could they not have thought of this? The young disciples of the large sects might not have walked out of those days where blood dripped from the tip of a blade every day, but they were definitely not flowers in a greenhouse. Take the Ancient Heaven sect, for example. Even the outer sect disciples of the Ancient Heaven sect couldn't live comfortably. Competition was everywhere, and the competition between geniuses was even more intense. Whoosh whoosh, many rushing wind sounds suddenly sounded in the air behind them. Quite a number of figures were hurriedly rushing over. With a couple of flashes, they immediately landed in front of Du Xiaofu and Gu Zhangyu. Wave after wave of powerful and vigorous auras that broke through the net immediately surrounded Du Xiaofu and Gu Zhangyu. Not good. It's the people from the Crouching Tiger Society. They've caught up. Seeing those figures descend, Gu Zhangyu's expression changed greatly. Gu Zhangyu naturally recognized those people. They were all from the Crouching Tiger Society, and they were all experts of the Crouching Tiger Society. Especially when Gu Zhongyu saw the two young men at the front, his face was even more shocked. He couldn't help but say, "Zheng Zhizhou, Yu Tianyo." Du Xiaofu looked around. There were more than 30 people in total. Waves of martial lord realm aura spread out, especially the two young men at the front. One of the young men in tight clothes had already reached the peak of the martial lord realm. He was probably only a step away from the martial king realm. However, the other young man in embroidered clothes had an outstanding temperament. His aura was also clearly at the initial stage of the martial king realm. He was a genuine martial king realm expert. And between the two of them, Du Xiaofu could see Zheng Mingzhou, who he had sent flying with a slap not long ago outside the clan affairs office. "Big brother, Brother Yi Tian, it's this new kid. This kid hit me and doesn't put our Crouching Tiger Society in his eyes." At this moment, Zheng Mingzhou saw Du Xiaofu. When enemies meet, their eyes would turn red. He held his face that was still in pain, pointed at Du Xiaofu, and said in a wronged voice to the two young men in tight clothes and embroidered clothes. At this moment, Zheng Mingzhou's gaze was fixed on Du Xiaofu. His eyes were filled with coldness. Coincidentally, he had met his big brother and Brother Yi Tian. It was time for this kid to be unlucky. Since he dared to slap him, he would definitely repay it 100 times over. He would make this kid regret it. It's the strong cultivators from the Crouching Tiger Society. The ones in front are Zheng Zhizhou and Yu Tiano. At this moment, Gu Zhongyu's voice quietly landed beside Du Xiaofu's ears. From his voice, it was not hard to tell that Gu Zhongyu was very serious and nervous at this moment. "Kid, you're new here?" Following Gu Zhongyu's words, the young man in tight clothes, Zheng Zhizhou, looked at Du Xiaofu with a cold gaze. His own brother had been slapped by someone. He had just become an inner sect disciple not long ago and was in the limelight. How could he let someone go at this time who dared to touch his brother? Du Xiaofu glanced at Zheng Zhizhou and said softly, "I'm new here. Do you have any business with me?" TSK, since you're new here, there's a need for us senior brothers to teach you some rules." After confirming that the other party was new, Zheng Zhizhou became even more fearless. He was just a newcomer. With his status as an inner sect disciple, as long as he did not take this kid's life, nothing would happen to him even if he beat this kid until he was crippled. As his voice fell, the profound qi in Zheng Zhizhou's body surged. Just as he was about to make a move, he saw the purple-robed youth in front of him looking straight at him. His gaze was inexplicably sharp and frightening, causing his heart to tremble. "All of you, get lost. Otherwise, you'll have to bear the consequences." An indifferent voice came out from Du Xiaofu's mouth. The continuous harassment had made Du Xiaofu truly angry. He was afraid that if he did not truly intimidate them today, there would be endless trouble in the future. The strong were respected, and the weak were bullied. This was one of the rules of survival in the ancient Heaven sect. Upon hearing Du Xiaofu's words, several gazes rippled with surprise. Even Gu Zhongyu, who was beside Du Xiaofu, instantly changed his expression. He slightly raised his head and looked at Du Xiaofu in shock. This was the inner sect disciple Zheng Zhizhou and the inner sect's bronze ranking expert, Yu Tianyo. This little junior brother named Du Xiaofu actually did not place them in his eyes. At this moment, the expression in the eyes of the youth in embroidered clothes gradually changed. It began to become a little gloomier without leaving a trace. "I've seen many new students like you. You'll be fine in the future once you know some rules." As his gloomy voice sounded, everyone could hear the suppressed anger in Zheng Zhizhou's voice. As he spoke, his eyes were filled with a sharp chill. The profound qi in his body immediately surged. Like an afterimage, he rapidly charged towards Du Xiaofu. Boom! At this moment, Zheng Zhizhou did not underestimate his opponent. He knew the strength of his younger brother. Since the latter was able to send him flying with a slap, he was definitely an expert. Therefore, the peak of the perfect martial marquis stage, which was only a step away from the martial king stage, whistled and fluctuated. It collapsed space, causing people's hearts to tremble. Bright Eye Fist. Profound qi surged and symbols flickered. Zheng Zhizhou clenched his hand into a fist and punched out. The mysterious rune energy in front of his fist immediately swept out like a wave, rolling and surging, sweeping in all directions. This Zhang Zhizhou was indeed worthy of being an inner sect disciple at the peak of the perfect martial marquis stage. Although his cultivation was at the perfect martial marquis stage, his strength was probably only at the initial stage of the martial king stage in the outside world. The terrifying aura of the fist made one's heart tremble inexplicably. In an instant, it swept in front of Du Xiaofu. It even shook Du Xiaofu's purple robe, causing it to flutter incessantly. Humph! At this moment, a trace of coldness flashed across Du Xiaofu's eyes. At this moment, he was somewhat angry. A dazzling symbol suddenly surged out, like a divine radiance spreading out. Suddenly, 21 array flags condensed in both of his hands. Swoosh swooshed the 21 array flags, which were spreading out astonishing fluctuations, immediately wrapped up the space in front of them with lightning speed and trajectory. The profound mysteries were tightly connected, turning into a dazzling symbol light pillar and disappearing. At this moment, everyone's eyes suddenly trembled, and their faces changed greatly. Even the youth in embroidered clothes was no exception. His eyes were instantly filled with shock. At this moment, when Zhang Zhizhou saw the 21 array flags appear in Du Xiaofu's hands, his eyes fiercely narrowed. Condensing 21 array flags, this was a genuine 6-star talisman master. Was this really a newcomer? If he had known that his opponent was at this level of cultivation, he would definitely not have the courage to make a move. Oh no, it's a 6-star talisman master. Shocked voices rang out one after another. The youths of the Crouching Tiger Society immediately fled. If they were to be trapped in a 6 stars initial ascension symbol array, they knew very well what the consequences would be. Even a Martial King initial ascension symbol array could forget about escaping. Boom! At this moment, the people of the Crouching Tiger Society still wanted to escape, but it was already too late. The entire space was rumbling and trembling, and dazzling symbols spread out in the air. In a short moment, an astonishingly huge array was condensed in the sky, immediately covering the surrounding space. The faint, terrifying pressure from the array made one's heart tremble. Swoosh, swoosh. At this moment, many of the ancient Heaven Sect's disciples nearby felt the huge commotion and immediately looked over. Then, figures immediately flew over. A woo. The array's symbols surged in the sky, and an endless amount of energy light twisted and condensed in the array. In the end, it turned into many demonic wolf shadows. The demonic wolf shadows were surging with power, as if they were alive, and filled with a ferocious aura. The demonic wolf shadows shuttled back and forth in the array, roaring ferociously and releasing a ferocious pressure. Bang, bang, bang. Inside the array, the space was chaotic. It seemed that there were people attacking with all their might, but it was useless. They could not break the array at all. Today's update is complete. Chapter 600. Translator. H2DH2 Mr. However, the attacks did collide with the surface of the talisman array. Dazzling runic energy storms shot into the sky and scattered in all directions, forming circles of energy ripples that spread out in the air. After reaching a certain point, they automatically disappeared. This scene did not last for long, but in a short period of time, it attracted many people around the talisman array. They all looked at the terrifying 6-star beginner-level talisman array in shock. A woo! The phantom of the demon wolf shuttled back and forth, then disappeared. When everything calmed down, in the chaotic space, many figures appeared before the eyes of many onlookers. It's bronze-ranking UTNI. It's Zhang Zhizhou and the others from the Crouching Tiger Society. The onlookers were shocked. Someone immediately recognized UTNI, Zhang Zhizhou, and the others. Poochie. At the same time, the 30 or so members of the Crouching Tiger Society, in order of strength, all spat out blood from their mouths. Then, their figures fell to the ground like cotton. Finally, it was Zhang Mingzhou, Zhang Zhizhou, and UTNI. One figure after another lay limply on the ground, dripping with blood. At this moment, their pale faces were filled with fear and shock. They could not even get up. Only they themselves knew that not only were their internal organs heavily injured, but even their souls were also injured. This was the most serious injury. At this moment, Perhaps they finally understood what kind of existence they had provoked today. Although their opponent was a newcomer, he was definitely not someone to be trifled with. A beginner 6-star formation master. If they had known his cultivation and strength, they would not have dared to find trouble with him. They would have avoided him as soon as possible. A beginner 6-star formation master. Gu Zhongyu was shocked. Just now, he had been standing beside Du Xiaofu. At this time, he was still in shock. Originally, he thought that he was unlucky this time. He didn't expect that this scene would happen in the end. The so-called newcomer beside him turned out to be a 6-star array master. Let's go. Du Xiaofu gestured to Gu Zhongyu. He didn't pay any more attention to the people lying on the ground. His purple robe flicked, and he swaggered off with his hands clasped behind his back. He believed that with this deterrence, even if he were to run into trouble in the ancient heaven sect, it would be a lot less troublesome. When Gu Zhongyu heard this, he was still in shock for a while before he came back to his senses. Seeing that Du Xiaofu was already far away, he immediately chased after him. Who is that person? Why haven't I seen him before? That purple-robed young man is actually a 6-star beginner talisman master. I don't think I've heard of him before. Looking at the young man with the purple broadsword on his back sleeve, the surrounding people immediately started to whisper as they tried to guess the young man's identity. With the purple-robed youth's age, he was already a 6-star talisman master. Among the younger generation of the ancient sky sect, there were probably only a handful of people like him. Senior Du, I didn't expect you to be a 6-star talisman master and an array talisman master. Senior Du, how did you cultivate? It's so terrifying. It's incredible. Senior Du, how did you come to the ancient sky sect? Along the way, Gu Zhongyu was shocked and asked a lot of questions to Du Xiaofu. However, it seemed that he did not get a definite answer from Du Xiaofu. In the end, he could only give up. However, his eyes were full of admiration for Du Xiaofu. He even called Du Xiaofu Senior Du Xiaofu. Among the same generation, strength was the most important. This was generally the case, unless there were special circumstances. Senior Du, Tianmu Peak is just ahead. I can only send you up to here. Further ahead is the inner sect disciple area. Inner sect disciples can enter the outer sect disciple area at will, but outer sect disciples are not allowed to enter the inner sect disciple area. Otherwise, they will be severely punished. Gu Zhongyu pointed to a huge mountain on the left among the towering peaks in front of them and said to Du Xiaofu, "Thank you." Du Xiaofu smiled at Gu Zhongyu. "That's the inner sect disciple area. Do you want to go into?" Gu Zhongyu seemed to have just remembered that Du Xiaofu was also an outer sect disciple. "Someone told me to go. I think it shouldn't be a problem," Du Xiaofu said. "Is that so?" Gu Zhongyu's eyes moved. At this time, he could only think that Du Xiaofu really had a background and backing in the Manchu. Otherwise, how could he enter the Manchu at this time and even dare to seriously injure Yu Tianyo and the others? Gu Zhongyu did not think too much about it and left. Du Xiaofu watched Gu Zhongyu leave and continued to walk along a wide stone path. Not far away, he encountered a group of young men and women. They seemed to be carrying out some mission. When they saw that Du Xiaofu was unfamiliar, they naturally questioned him. When Du Xiaofu said that Elder Gu Qingyang had told him to go to Tianmu Peak, although the young men and women were suspicious, they did not stop him and immediately let him go. They even gave Du Xiaofu a shortcut and told Du Xiaofu that if he had something to do in the Manchu, he could fly in the Manchu. However, ordinary outer sect disciples did not have the ability to fly in the Manchu. Inner sect disciples were an exception. With someone giving him directions and even telling him that he could fly, Du Xiaofu smoothly arrived at the foot of Tianmu Peak. It was a huge mountain peak, but it seemed to be located in a quiet place in the Manchu. The surroundings were quiet, and on the mountain peak, there were many buildings hidden in the greenery. When Du Xiaofu leaped onto the mountain peak, it was already dusk. The sun was setting in the west, and the setting sun shrouded the mountain peak. The setting sun shone on a simple and elegant courtyard with an ancient aura on the mountain peak. Du Xiaofu appeared outside the courtyard and sized up the simple and elegant courtyard. A figure appeared in front of Du Xiaofu's eyes. It was an old man in his 60s. He was wearing a plain robe, and there were traces of spatial fluctuations around him that were difficult to detect. Martial Emperor Realm. When Du Xiaofu saw this old man, he could not help but raise his eyebrows slightly. The aura emitted from this old man was not inferior to that of Vice Dean Zhuge Qiangbang. He was definitely at the Martial Emperor Realm. Who are you? Why have you come to Tianmu Peak? The old man was also sizing up Du Xiaofu. He looked at Du Xiaofu, as if he was unable to detect Du Xiaofu's specific aura. His eyes were filled with astonishment. Disciple Du Xiaofu. Master, Elder Gu Qingyang, asked me to come. Du Xiaofu bowed and replied, So you are junior brother. When the old man heard that, his expression changed. Then, a smile appeared on his face. He looked at Du Xiaofu and said, We have been guessing when Master would accept a junior brother for us. It seems like it is you. Where is Master? Has he returned? Master seems to have gone to look for sect leader. Du Xiaofu looked at the old man in front of him and asked curiously, You are? The old man smiled and said, My name is Yu Wanli. I'm your third senior brother. Strictly speaking, there's still a senior sister and 3 senior brothers above you. It's just that they aren't in the sect right now. If there's a chance in the future, you guys will meet again. Greetings, third senior brother. Just now, Du Xiaofu had already guessed the other party's identity in his heart. However, he did not expect his third senior brother to be so old. You are welcome. Master is not back yet. Come in and have a rest. I will bring you around to familiarize you with this place. You will be staying here in the future. The old man was very warm and kind like an elder brother. Then, he brought Du Xiaofu to familiarize himself with Tianmu Peak. From his third senior brother Yu Wanli, Du Xiaofu found out that Tianmu Peak was the territory of Master Gu Qingyang. From his tone, it was not difficult for Du Xiaofu to know that Master Gu Qingyang's position in the Manchu was not low. Yu Wanli was curious about how Du Xiaofu had been accepted by Master. Du Xiaofu did not know how to explain and only gave a rough explanation. Naturally, he did not mention anything about the assessment area. Therefore, Yu Wanli was quite surprised. However, he did not ask any further. Night gradually fell. Master Gu Qingyang had not returned yet. Under Yu Wanli's arrangements, Du Xiaofu temporarily settled down in a quiet room in the courtyard. The room was very clean. Although no one had stayed in it for a long time, it was still very clean. It was probably cleaned frequently. Moonlight shrouded the courtyard. Standing on Tianmu Peak, the surroundings were shrouded in clouds. It was like a fairyland. Du Xiaofu's figure stood on the peak, looking at the bright moon that was like a jade plate, thinking about the recent events. After a long time, he murmured softly, Father, Mother, Xiaojing, Little Qing, Little Demon Du, Little Tiger. Late at night, Du Xiaofu returned to his room and sat cross-legged on his bed. This time, entering the ancient heaven sect, one of the 9 great powers of the Central Plains, might be an opportunity for him. He must become a true expert as soon as possible. Walala. A moment later, Du Xiaofu's hand seals condensed and began to breathe. His body was enveloped in a circle of faint white light. The light became more and more dazzling. Finally, it was like a white divine light that enveloped his entire body. The next day, the first rays of the morning sun shone. The mountains were faintly discernible under the white sky. Then, the red sun rose. The mountain peaks, cliffs, and steep rocks were dyed red by the rays of the morning sun. It was exceptionally magnificent. Huff! A mouthful of turbid air was spat out from his throat. Du Xiaofu withdrew his hand seals and stopped his breathing. He felt that the spiritual force in his Naiwen palace was becoming more and more solid. Under the mysterious, incomplete cultivation method, it seemed that he was about to have a breakthrough in the cultivation of a spirit symbol master. However, this sign of a breakthrough in the spirit symbol master realm seemed to be hindered by the temporary stagnation of his martial path. Chapter 601. Yu Wanli, hand over the person. At this moment, a loud shout came from Tianmu Peak. Du Xiaofu, who was in his room, could faintly hear it. Du Xiaofu frowned. He did not know what was going on. However, he was currently on Tianmu Peak. Tianmu Peak was his master Gu Qingyang's territory. Naturally, he had to go and take a look. When Du Xiaofu went outside, he saw third senior Yu Wanli facing several figures. The one in front was an old man who looked to be in his 60s. His aura was definitely above the martial emperor realm. He was arguing with third senior Yu Wanli about something. Behind the old man in his 60s, Du Xiaofu's eyes suddenly flickered. He saw two familiar figures. It was Zhang Zhizhou, who was severely injured by him yesterday, and another young man called Yu Tianyo. Seeing Yu Tianyo and Zhang Zhizhou, Du Xiaofu already knew why they were here. Instead, a youth in short clothes beside Yu Tianyo and Zhang Zhizhou attracted Du Xiaofu's attention. This youth looked to be around 23 or 24 years old. When he was serious, he was like a cold star. His straight nose was as cold as ice. The side of his face was as sharp as a knife. His features were clear and handsome. Yu Wanli, hand over the person. I found out that the kid came to Tianmu Peak. The old man's voice was very loud. He looked as if he was here to vent his anger. His eyes were bright, and he was wearing a plain robe. He did not have a good attitude towards Yu Wanli. Yu Wanli had a smile on his face the whole time. No matter how much the old man roared, he just smiled and said, "Elder Kong, the person you're looking for is indeed on my Tianmu Peak. However, if there's anything, you can talk to my master." Yu Wanli, don't use Elder Qingyang to pressure me. Now that Elder Qingyang is not here, you are in charge of Tianmu Peak. You have to hand over the person. The person called Elder Kong was still unwilling to give up. His aura was overbearing. After sizing up Yu Wanli for a short while, Du Xiaofu directly walked to Yu Wanli's side. He nodded and bowed, but did not say anything. As for the old man and Yu Tianyi and the others, Du Xiaofu acted as if he didn't see them at all. "Little junior brother, you go back first." When Yu Wanli saw Du Xiaofu, there was a slight fluctuation in his eyes, but he still had a smile on his face. "Master, that's him." At the same time, Yu Tianyo and Zhang Zhizhou immediately recognized Du Xiaofu. There was still some lingering fear in their eyes, but at this moment, they seemed to have found the most stable backing. They immediately pointed at Du Xiaofu. When he heard this, Elder Kong's gaze immediately stared intently at Du Xiaofu. There was a hint of surprise in his eyes. Looking at Du Xiaofu's age, it seemed that he was even younger than he had imagined. From the two disappointing disciples, Elder Kong already knew some things. His two disciples and 30 over outer sect disciples were all injured by a new disciple called Du Xiaofu. That new disciple was young, but he was already a 6-star soul symbol master who could set up a 6-star beginner-level symbol array. When he saw Du Xiaofu, who seemed to be 17 or 18 years old, Elder Kong's heart was moved. Such a young 6-star soul symbol master, and an array symbol master at that. He naturally knew what this meant. Talent was definitely rare. If it was an ordinary disciple fight, Elder Kong would have been too embarrassed to come to Tianmu Peak and would not easily come to Tianmu Peak. However, not only were his two disciples seriously injured, their souls were also injured. Even if they were in the ancient heaven sect, it would not be easy for them to recover. They would have to pay a heart-wrenching price, and they might not even be able to recover from the injuries to their minds and souls. This was equivalent to directly affecting the future of his two disciples. Although a fight between fellow disciples in the ancient heaven sect was not a big deal, there were not many people who would be so ruthless, let alone his own disciple. Therefore, Elder Kong had come to the Heavenite Peak to seek justice. Looking at Du Xiaofu, Elder Kong's gaze was tightly fixed. He opened his mouth and said, "You are Du Xiaofu. Are you the one who severely injured Yu Tianyo and Zhang Zhizhou?" "That's right. However, I was not ruthless. I only taught them a lesson. If I were ruthless, they would not have the chance to go back and cry." Only then did Du Xiaofu look at Elder Kong. At such a close distance, he could feel the faintly discernible aura on Elder Kong's body. He was even more shocked. Elder Kong's cultivation seemed to be slightly stronger than third senior brother's cultivation. As Du Xiaofu's voice fell, many people's expressions changed. At this time, even Yu Wanli was no exception. He was not very clear about the background of this junior brother. Early in the morning, he heard from Elder Kong that his junior brother had seriously injured Yu Tianyo, Zhang Zhizhou, and dozens of other people. He had some doubts in his heart. Now that he heard this junior brother admitted himself, he could not help but be a little surprised. "Du Xiaofu, what do you mean?" Listening to Du Xiaofu's words, Yu Tiano and Zheng Zhizhou's expressions became very ugly. Du Xiaofu said that they were crying. He did not put them in his eyes at all and insulted them again. When the handsome young man of 23 to 24 years old heard this, he looked at Du Xiaofu with a cold aura. His gaze unexpectedly fluctuated a little. Haha! Elder Kong was stunned for a moment, then he laughed loudly. Everyone could hear the extreme displeasure in his laughter. When he stopped laughing, his face suddenly became gloomy. He looked at Du Xiaofu and said, "Boy, you have guts. According to the sect rules, you should be punished for severely injuring your fellow disciples." Du Xiaofu looked at Elder Kong. His gaze was neither servile nor overbearing. He looked directly at Elder Kong and said, "May I ask, Elder, have you investigated why they fought with me? Who was right and who was wrong?" Listening to Du Xiaofu's words, Zheng Zhizhou and Yu Tiano's pale faces became even paler. Hearing this, Elder Kong was stunned. It seemed that he did not expect the boy in front of him to be so fearless in front of him. As for the investigation, Elder Kong had already more or less figured it out. How could he not know what the inner sect disciples were like in front of the outer sect disciples? The Manchu had always turned a blind eye to this kind of thing. Elder Kong knew better than anyone what his disciples were like in front of the outer sect disciples. Furthermore, this boy was new. However, at this moment, Du Xiaofu directly asked who was right and who was wrong. This made Elder Kong stunned. However, as an elder of the ancient heaven sect, he naturally would not be frightened by Du Xiaofu. He looked at Du Xiaofu and said in a low voice, "No matter who was right and who was wrong, you should not have been so heavy-handed. Elder, I was bullied for no reason yesterday. If my cultivation was a little weaker yesterday, the one who was injured today would be me. Elder, would you punish your two disciples?" Du Xiaofu heard this and continued to ask. Elder Kong's face suddenly stiffened. If it were his two disciples who had injured Du Xiaofu yesterday, he would be fine as long as he was still alive. He was just a new disciple. Even if he was crippled, as long as he was alive, nothing would happen to him. However, there were some things that everyone in the Manchu knew in secret. Everyone knew some unwritten rules and regulations, but once these things were brought out in public, it would not look good for anyone's face. Elder Kong was a little angry. This brat did not even have the slightest bit of respect in front of him. The purpose of his visit this time around was not to do anything to this brat. At most, he would just punish him a little. His main purpose was to find the Heaven Eye Peak and ask for some benefits for his two disciples to recover from their injuries. However, at this moment, Elder Kong was angered by Du Xiaofu's rebuttal. He looked at Du Xiaofu with a gloomy face and said, "Brat, I have to say that you are very bold." As soon as he finished speaking, a faint, oppressive aura spread out from Elder Kong's body and enveloped Du Xiaofu's body. Boom! The aura spread out as if it wanted to freeze the space. A great invisible suppressive force immediately enveloped Du Xiaofu's body. At this moment, a chill suddenly surfaced in Du Xiaofu's eyes, which had been neither servile nor overbearing. This Elder Kong did not care about Du Xiaofu's status and actually wanted to attack him. There was no need to give him any face. Elder Kong, that should be enough. At this moment, Yuanli's figure appeared in front of Du Xiaofu. A faint aura spread out from his body at the same time. There was still a faint smile on his face, as if he would never be angry. As soon as Third Senior appeared in front of him, Du Xiaofu immediately felt the pressure around him decrease greatly. "Yuanli, you must give me an explanation today." Elder Kong's eyes trembled as he faced Yuanli. "Explanation? What kind of explanation do you want?" Yuanli smiled faintly as he looked at Elder Kong. Just as his final words sounded out, his smiling face suddenly turned dark and expressionless. He looked directly at Elder Kong and said, "Elder Kong, do you think that my Heaven Eye Peak is easy to bully? Since you have come to my Heaven Eye Peak to demand an explanation, why don't you look for the sect leader to judge the consequences of your disciple offending his superior?" Elder Kong was stunned when he saw Yuanli's face suddenly change color. After which, he asked doubtfully, "Offending his superior? What offending his superior?" Chapter 602. Yuanli snorted, looking straight at Elder Kong, and said in a deep voice, "Du Xiaofu is my master's most recent disciple, and also my junior brother. He is Master's inner sect disciple, and according to the seniority of the sect, he calls you senior brother. So naturally, he is your martial uncle. After pausing for a moment, Yuanli looked at Elder Kong and said indifferently, your disciple offended his superior and dared to be rude to his martial uncle. Elder Kong, you have really taught your disciple well. I thought you would bring your disciple here to apologize. I didn't expect that you would want martial uncle to apologize to martial nephew. You are ignoring the sect rules and not putting the sect leader in your eyes. Elder Kong's expression kept changing as Yuanli spoke. In the end, his expression became uglier and uglier. Du Xiaofu was also slightly stunned at this moment. Listening to the words of his third senior brother, it seemed that as a disciple of his master, his position in the sect was extremely high, and he was of the same generation as Elder Kong. Du Xiaofu was also surprised by his third senior brother, Yuanli. He always had a smile on his face and seemed like a nice guy. However, once his third senior changed his expression, he wouldn't be polite at all. This kind of person was definitely not to be trifled with. Once he was trifled with, his opponent wouldn't even have the chance to kneel down and beg for mercy. Elder Kong's expression was extremely complicated. Zhang Zhizhou and Yu Tianyo's expressions were even more interesting. When they heard that Du Xiaofu was Elder Gu Qingyang's direct disciple, their hearts trembled violently. Zhang Zhizhou and Yu Tianyo naturally knew what Elder Gu Qingyang's disciple meant. They originally thought that he was just a new disciple. If they knew that he was Elder Gu Qingyang's direct disciple, they wouldn't have dared to make a move. Elder Kong's expression was complicated. At this moment, he didn't know what to do. This Du Xiaofu was actually Elder Gu Qingyang's disciple. It would be difficult for him to get any benefits from this. My Tianmu Peak is quite lively this early in the morning. An indifferent voice came from the distant sky. When the last word fell, a white-robed old man in his 70s had already appeared in front of everyone. Under the rays of the rising sun, the mountain peak was enchanting in the clouds. His white beard fluttered in the wind, his white robe fluttered, and his white hair was half tied up and half scattered. What a sage-like appearance! Naturally, it was Elder Gu Qingyang. Greetings, Master. Yuanli and Du Xiaofu, both Elder Gu Qingyang Yuanli, and Yuanli instantly. Yuanli was relieved. With his master's arrival, Elder Gu Yuanli was Elder Gu Qingyang. Greetings, Elder Gu. Elder Kong's expression changed when he saw Elder Gu Qingyang's figure. He immediately cupped his hands together and bowed. Zhang Zhizhou, Yu Tianyo, and the other disciples behind him also lowered their heads respectfully. No need for formalities. Elder Gu Qingyang looked around. He seemed to be in a good mood. He then looked at Elder Kong and said softly, Elder Kong, are you here at Tianmu Peak so early in the morning to see me? Elder Kong's expression became a little awkward when he saw Elder Gu Qingyang. When Yuanli saw this, he untimely said to Elder Gu Qingyang, Master, Elder Kong came to Tianmu Peak early in the morning because two of his disciples were injured by junior brother. He hopes that Master can give him an explanation. Elder Kong's expression became even more awkward when he heard this. Yuanli's words were unfavorable to him, but he couldn't refute it. Oh, when he heard this, Elder Gu Qingyang was stunned for a moment. He glanced at Du Xiaofu, then looked at Elder Kong and softly said, Elder Kong, is this matter possible? Elder Kong's expression was a little awkward. He lifted his head to look at Elder Gu Qingyang and smiled bitterly. Elder Gu, it's actually not a big deal. It's just that two of my useless disciples were seriously injured by your new disciple. It's common for disciples to spar in the sect. I'm here to take a look. I'll leave now. Is that so? If this matter is true, we can't let it go so easily. When he heard Elder Kong's words, Elder Gu Qingyang's rosy face instantly raised his eyebrows. His eyes narrowed as he turned to look at Du Xiaofu and said, Xiaofu, did you injure someone? Yes, Master. Du Xiaofu nodded. There was naturally nothing to hide in front of his master, Gu Qingyang. In fact, there was nothing to hide. Xiaofu, you're in the wrong here. You've only just entered my sect. How could you injure a disciple of mine? And to such a serious extent. It was unknown what Elder Gu Qingyang's intention was, but he actually secretly scolded Du Xiaofu. He then looked at Elder Kong and said, Elder Kong, although Xiaofu is my disciple, he's still a junior in terms of age. Since this is a matter between the juniors, let them settle it themselves. According to the Manchu's rules, let them settle it at the Sky Marshal Plaza. Let's go to the Sky Marshal Plaza. When they heard this, Yu Tianai and Zheng Zhizhou's expressions became incomparably ugly. The Sky Marshal Plaza was a special place in the ancient Heaven sect. There weren't too many Manchu rules in the Sky Marshal Plaza. Things like snatching treasures and fighting could be done there. If there were any conflicts between the disciples of the ancient Heaven sect, they would also settle it at the Sky Marshal Plaza. In short, there wouldn't be any consequences as long as no one died on the Sky Marshal Plaza. At this moment, Yu Tianai and Zheng Zhizhou had already been seriously injured by Du Xiaofu when they were at their peak yesterday. Now that both of them had suffered serious injuries, wouldn't they be looking for trouble if they still went to the Sky Marshal Plaza? Elder Kong's expression was somewhat helpless. This was clearly Elder Gu Qingyang protecting his disciples. He clearly knew that his two disciples were seriously injured, yet he still went to the Sky Marshal Plaza. Wasn't this clearly showing that he was protecting his own disciples? Looking at Elder Gu Qingyang, Elder Kong could only say, "Elder Gu, my two good-for-nothing disciples are seriously injured. I'm afraid they won't be able to enter the Sky Marshal Plaza. Why don't we just let it go?" How can we just let it go? Although Xiaofu is my disciple, he's not an exception. How can I casually injure the disciples of the Manchu? Elder Gu Qingyang didn't seem to intend to let it go. He looked at Elder Kong and smiled. "Elder Kong, I've always been a fair person. How about this? Your two disciples are seriously injured and naturally won't be able to enter the Sky Marshal Plaza. Why don't you find someone from the same sect to replace them? You can find the strongest disciple around the same age as them and go to the Sky Marshal Plaza. As long as they win, I'll take out a mid-grade Tao artifact and 2 king-grade profound pills to give them some benefits. What do you think?" As soon as Elder Gu Qingyang finished speaking, Elder Kong, who had thought that Elder Gu Qingyang was being protective of his son, had a puzzled expression on his face. Yu Wanli, who was standing behind Elder Gu Qingyang, also had a puzzled look on his face. His master was giving away medicinal pills and Tao artifacts to that Kong fellow. A mid-grade Tao artifact and 2 king-grade mystical-level medicinal pills were shockingly valuable. It was definitely a big deal. Although that Kong fellow had quite a few disappointing disciples, there were also quite a few experts among them. What made Yu Wanli even more puzzled was that his master seemed to be a different person today. If someone dared to come to Tianmu Peak to cause trouble, his master's temper would definitely be violent. How could he be so easy to deal with? This, after Elder Kong pondered for a while, he also couldn't make up his mind. He really didn't know what Elder Gu Qingyang was planning in his heart. Elder Kong knew that this Elder Gu Qingyang in front of him was definitely not someone to be trifled with. Furthermore, he was a troublesome master. He was also puzzled in his heart. Why was Gu Qingyang so easy to talk to this time? "Master, why don't I replace Junior Brother Yu and Junior Brother Zheng to go to the Sky Marshal Plaza?" At this moment, the handsome young man in short clothes, who had been silent all this time, took a step forward and said to Elder Kong. The side of his face was sharp and angular, but his temperament was slightly cold. Elder Kong looked at the short-clothed young man and his eyes secretly moved. He then slightly gritted his teeth and looked at Elder Gu Qingyang. He said, "Elder Gu, what do you think?" Elder Gu Qingyang looked at the handsome young man in short robes and smiled slightly. He then looked at Elder Kong and said, "Of course, there's no problem. This new disciple of mine is young and full of vigor. I should let him know that the ancient Heaven sect has as many experts as there are clouds in the sky. In the future, he should cultivate properly. However, Elder Kong, I took out a mid-grade Tao artifact and 2 king-grade profound realm medicinal pills. If news of this spreads, I won't have a good time." After hearing Elder Gu Qingyang's words, Elder Kong seemed to understand. He hesitated for a moment, then said with a smile, "I understand. As long as your disciple wins, I will also take out a middle-grade Tao artifact and 2 king-grade mysterious elixirs. I wonder if Elder Gu is satisfied?" "Good. It's a deal. 7 days later, we will meet at the Heaven Marshal Plaza." Elder Gu Qingyang nodded his head in satisfaction. "Elder Gu, I'm afraid 7 days won't do. The second inter-sect disciple selection will be held in 7 days. Elder Kong said without a trace. How about 3 days? 3 days later, how about we meet at the Heaven Marshall Plaza? 3 days. Elder Gu Qingyang raised his eyebrows, then smiled slightly and said, 3 days it is. 3 days later, we will let the youngsters settle their own matters at the Heaven Marshall Plaza. Okay, I will see you in 3 days. Elder Gu, I will also take my leave. As soon as he finished speaking, Elder Kong led the group of disciples to bid farewell and left. Readers who saw Xiao Yu's Weibo post should know that I pulled an all-nighter last night. I wanted to explode today, but Lenovo's computer changed its configuration and automatically shut down. As a result, I can't find the manuscript I pulled an all-nighter on. Even if you beat me to death, I will never buy Lenovo's book again. On average, it will automatically shut down once every 3 days. I am also a computer idiot. I just rushed out 2 chapters. Xiao Yu continued to write. Chapter 603. After watching Elder Kong and the rest leave, only then did Yuanli turn to Elder Gu Qingyang beside him. His expression was somewhat puzzled as he said, Master, that brat just now is called Yixian. He became an inner-sect disciple last year, and his talent can be compared to others. If my guess is correct, that brat may have already reached the mysterious Martial King stage. Without a doubt, Yuanli was worried about Du Xiaofu. There weren't many rules in the Tianwu Square. If there was a chance, Yixian wouldn't let it go so easily and would take revenge for his fellow disciples. As for a mid-grade Dao artifact and 2 king-grade mystical-level medicinal pills, if he were to lose them, their value would still be astonishing and not a small amount. That kid isn't just in the Martial King realm. He's really in the Martial King realm. After hearing Wan Li's words, Elder Gu Qingyang's expression didn't change much. He didn't seem to care much about Wan Li's words. He even smiled and looked at Du Xiaofu. Xiaofu, what do you think? Is there any problem? Du Xiaofu smiled and looked at Gu Qingyang. No problem. That's good. If you need any help, just look for your 3rd senior. Although your 3rd senior isn't very good, he can guide you for now. Elder Gu Qingyang looked at Du Xiaofu. Why would he care about Yixian, who had just reached the Martial King realm? In Fertile Field City, he had seen Du Xiaofu kill Martial King realm cultivators with his own eyes. 3 days later, he just showed the people of the Manchu that he, Gu Qingyang, had taken in another good seedling. I see that your weapon is a sword. Here is a sword manual called the Bright Saint Sword Manual. It's a bit different from ordinary sword skills. It was created by an expert of the ancient Heaven sect who spent his entire life in a secret place. Unfortunately, I've only cultivated for 100 years, and I think I've only scratched the surface. Take it and cultivate. If there's anything you don't understand, come and look for me. After saying that, Elder Gu Qingyang handed an ancient scroll to Du Xiaofu. There were mysterious engravings on it, and an ancient aura spread out. Bright Saint Sword Manual. Looking at the ancient scroll in Gu Qingyang's hand, Yuanli was surprised. Wasn't his youngest junior brother a spirit talisman master? He was wondering why his master had taken in a spirit talisman master as a disciple. Seeing his master give his junior brother the Bright Saint Sword Manual, Yuanli was even more surprised. This was a treasure of the ancient Heaven sect. It might be a bit exaggerated to call it the sect's treasure, but in the Manchu, this Bright Saint Sword Manual definitely had a high status. Ordinary inner-sect disciples didn't have the qualifications to cultivate it. He didn't expect his youngest junior brother to be given the Bright Saint Sword Manual by his master as soon as he entered the Manchu. Du Xiaofu didn't stand on ceremony and took the ancient scroll from his master, Gu Qingyang. He could feel the aura of the Bright Saint Sword Manual. It seemed to be from ancient times, but its aura was extraordinary. It shouldn't be an ordinary item. Also, I have a piece of bad news for you. Becoming my disciple will be relatively troublesome, so you must win in the Heaven Marshall Plaza. I've talked to the sect master. If you want to become my disciple, you must pass a test. It just so happens that you're going to the Heaven Marshall Plaza in 3 days. If you win, you can also take the test. At that time, the sect master won't have anything to say. Elder Gu Qingyang said to Du Xiaofu. Du Xiaofu nodded. Then, under Elder Gu Qingyang's arrangement, Du Xiaofu could choose a room on the Heaven Eye Mountain, or choose a mountain peak nearby as his cultivation ground. In the ancient heaven sect, only a few inner sect disciples had the qualifications to have a mountain peak as their own cultivation ground. Du Xiaofu didn't hesitate. He thought that it would be safer for him to cultivate in the future. Naturally, he chose a mountain peak as his cultivation ground. Then, with third senior brother Yuanli's introduction and guidance, Du Xiaofu chose a mountain peak not far from the Heaven Eye Mountain as his cultivation ground. The mountain peak was called Ancient Rock Peak. It originally had a courtyard built with rocks and wood from ancient trees. Although the courtyard was clean, it took Du Xiaofu a day to clean it inside and out. On this day, Du Xiaofu didn't just simply tidy up the place where he lived. For safety reasons, Du Xiaofu even set up some formations and seals around the mountain peak. In any case, Du Xiaofu was publicly known as a talisman master in the ancient heaven sect. He wasn't afraid of people knowing that he cultivated both martial arts and talisman arts. In a colossus like the ancient heaven sect, there were definitely many people who cultivated both martial arts and talisman arts. At dusk, on the mountain peak, Du Xiaofu looked at the courtyard that he had personally cleaned and the surrounding scenery. In particular, in front of the courtyard, on the cliff of the mountain peak, there was an ancient camphor tree that was probably over 100 years old. Under the illumination of the sunset, its lush leaves shone brightly. A smile appeared on Du Xiaofu's face, and a sense of satisfaction welled up in his heart. A moment later, third senior apprentice brother Yuanli personally delivered a lot of daily necessities. When he felt the traces of the formation and restrictions on Ancient Rock Peak, he was secretly moved. He enthusiastically explained a lot of things before leaving. Third senior brother was extremely enthusiastic. In the morning, third senior brother was extremely protective of him, which made Du Xiaofu feel quite warm in his heart. At night, on the bed in the room, Du Xiaofu sat cross-legged. In his hand, he took out the bright Saint Sword manual that his master Gu Qingyang gave him in the morning. Hula! An ancient aura rippled as the sword manual opened. Du Xiaofu's mind peered in, and a dazzling talisman rune immediately spread out. In a short moment, a dazzling light enveloped Du Xiaofu. Waves of dazzling talisman rune fluctuations condensed into sword shadows, and then swept into the space between Du Xiaofu's eyebrows like a spirit snake. The dazzling talisman rune was dazzling. Du Xiaofu had already closed his eyes. At this time, his mind was in a misty place. There was a hazy illusory figure holding a long sword in his hand. The illusory figure condensed a sword technique, and the sword was slightly pushed forward. The tip of the sword trembled, and it seemed to be stabbing left and right. The sword light swept out, sometimes slashing straight, sometimes slashing horizontally, and sometimes lifting up the sword. The long sword trembled, and sword light scattered in all directions, enveloping the space. The sword light swept out, and there was no energy fluctuation. It was just a move, but the sword technique was extremely exquisite and mysterious. Du Xiaofu's mind observed the sword technique, and he was immediately attracted and immersed in it. At night, the sky was covered by the curtain of night, and the moon was bright and the stars were few. In a courtyard on a mountain peak, Elder Kong was sitting upright. He looked at a young man in short clothes in front of him and said, "You've already seen the one called Du Xiaofu. What do you think?" The young man in short clothes had a cold temperament. Hearing this, his eyes slightly raised on his handsome face, and he said to Elder Kong, "Master, that Du Xiaofu shouldn't be weak. He's just a talisman master. As long as we don't give him any chance, it won't be too difficult to defeat him." "That's good." This time, Elder Gu took out a mid-grade Dao artifact and 2 king-grade mysterious elixirs. "Yixian, you can't be careless." Elder Kong looked at the young man in short clothes, Yixian, and smiled faintly. He said, "That kid's talent is extraordinary. At such a young age, he's already a 6-star talisman master. However, in the hands of Elder Gu, I'm afraid that he won't be able to accomplish anything in the future. Elder Gu is famous. Haha. The bright moon hung in the sky, like a jade plate. The moonlight shone in the sky, illuminating the mountains. In the courtyard, the mysterious light of the talisman that enveloped Du Xiaofu's body gradually disappeared. The scroll of the bright Saint Sword manual in front of him also dimmed, and the ancient aura disappeared. Chi. After a moment, Du Xiaofu's slightly closed eyes slowly opened. Light flickered in his eyes, and there was shock in his eyes. From the Bright Saint Sword Manual, Du Xiaofu could be said to have the most direct understanding of the Bright Saint Sword Manual. The sword skills in the Bright Saint Sword Manual were extremely different from ordinary sword skills. The sword skills in the Bright Saint Sword Manual did not have any ranks. There were a total of 6 sword skills, and within the 6 sword skills, there were countless small moves. The 6 sword skills were all pure sword skills. In a battle between cultivators, generally speaking, when there was a great disparity in strength between the two, the stronger side would be able to suppress and kill their opponent with their tyrannical strength. Strength can defeat 10. That included. Absolute strength was enough to sweep away everything. Absolute strength was also the most fundamental. However, if there was not much difference in strength between two people, and even the level of their weapons were not much different, then the final deciding factor would often be martial skills. To any cultivator, martial skills were extremely important. The higher the rank of a martial skill, the stronger its might would be. However, if one's cultivation was low, it would be difficult to cultivate a high-rank martial skill. At that moment, the 6 sword skills in the Bright Saint Sword Manual did not have any ranks. They were only 6 simple sword skills, but they were infinitely profound and had a myriad of variations. Du Xiaofu even had a faint feeling that the 6 sword skills seemed to give him a hazy feeling of déjà vu. However, when he thought about it carefully, he could not think of anything. Comprehend and train. Thinking about how his weapon had always been the Tyrant Shadow, and how he had not practiced any sword skills for quite some time, Du Xiaofu felt that the Bright Saint Sword Manual was very suitable for him. Thus, he immediately continued to comprehend the Bright Saint Sword Manual. The next day, the Ancient Heaven sect was as usual. However, there was a piece of news that spread through the sect. It shocked many disciples, and even the upper echelons of the Ancient Heaven sect. It was said that Elder Gu Qingyang had recently accepted a new disciple. 3 days later, he would fight Yixian on the Heaven Martial Plaza. This battle was not simple. It even made Elder Gu and Elder Kong both take out a mid-quality Dao artifact and 2 king-grade profound-level medicinal pellets as wagers. Chapter 604. Once this news spread, along with the news that Zheng Zhizhou and Yu Tiano, who was on the bronze ranking, had been seriously injured by the new disciple's 6-star beginner-level symbol array, it immediately attracted a lot of attention within the Ancient Heaven sect. There weren't many disciples in the Ancient Heaven sect who knew about Elder Gu's new disciple, so they didn't know much about him. However, there weren't many people in the Manchu who didn't know about Elder Kong's disciple, Yixian. Yixian was a famous existence within the sect. Yixian had already become an inner sect disciple during the test a year ago. He had always been ranked in the top 30 on the bronze ranking and could be said to be an outstanding talent. He was the focus of the Manchu's nurturing. Not long after Yixian became an inner sect disciple, he had already broken through to the Martial King initial level. Right now, there were some Manchu disciples who guessed that Yixian might have even reached the Martial King mysterious level. As everyone was curious, Du Xiaofu's identity was also found out. However, other than knowing that Du Xiaofu was a 6-star soul symbol master, and that he had used a 6-star beginner-level symbol array to seriously injure Yu Tiano, Zheng Zhizhou, and several other members of the Crouching Tiger Society, no one knew anything else. A couple of elders and middle-aged burly men were seated in a hall within a quiet courtyard. Their expressions were a little grave. At the head of the hall, an old man who looked to be in his 50s stroked his long gray-white beard. His gaze was serious as he said, "That young man called Du Xiaofu wouldn't be the brat who took first place back then, right? Could it be that Elder Qingyang has already accepted that brat? It's very likely. I've already asked around. That young man called Du Xiaofu carries something that looks like a broadsword on his back. It's extremely similar to the brat who appeared in the test area back then. It's most likely that he's that brat." Another burly man in plain clothes who looked to be in his 50s said softly. His bright and spirited eyes flickered secretly. No one knew what he was thinking at this moment. These 2 people were Elder Hu Sangkuan and Elder Changming Zhe, who had seen Du Xiaofu from afar during the Ancient Heaven sect's outer sect disciple assessment. There were several other people in the hall at this time. They were also some of the powerhouses of the ancient heaven sect who had been in the assessment area. When the time comes, we'll go and take a look as well. If it's really that brat, we can't let Elder Qingyang ruin him. Elder Hu Sankuan's eyes flickered as if he was plotting something. Elder Hu, what do you mean? A long-robed elder asked Hu Sankuan. Hearing this, Elder Hu Sankuan chuckled and said, I heard that the sect leader did not agree to Elder Qingyang immediately accepting a disciple. I reckon that the sect leader also suspects that Du Xiaofu is the brat who appeared in our assessment area back then. He is worried that Elder Qingyang will destroy another good seedling when the time comes. If that's the case, we still have a chance. Let's take advantage of the fact that no one else knows. Hearing this, the expressions of the several elders, led by Elder Chang Mingzhe, changed slightly as a knowing smile appeared in their eyes. A group of mountains stood tall. On a huge mountain surrounded by mountains and clusters of peaks, the surroundings were lush and verdant. Within the mountain streams, the sound of gurgling water could be heard, showing an exuberant vitality. Clouds and mist lingered around the mountain peak. In the distance, thousands of mountains rose and fell, magnificent and boundless. On the mountain peak, in front of the steep mountain peak, looking from top to bottom, there seemed to be a bottomless abyss. It was so dark that one couldn't see anything. Only mist like water vapor flowed inside. In front of the cliff, there was a 7-foot-tall middle-aged man. His figure was thin, but appeared slender and sturdy. He wore a green robe embroidered with green patterns. The robe was turned up, and his long black hair was neatly combed into a bun. A few strands of hair hung down from his ears. The green robe and black hair appeared elegant under the breeze of the mountain peak. Set off by his tall and slender figure, there was a hint of elegance in his dignified appearance. He must have been a handsome man when he was young. Father. On the mountain peak, a delicate voice slowly fell, and then a beautiful figure slowly descended. The beautiful figure was wearing a moon-white and pink brocade dress. On the hem and cuffs of the dress, there were light yellow flower patterns, which added a bit of cuteness. The light pink gauze cloak was draped over her shoulders, and there was a pinkish-white belt around her waist. It accentuated her well-proportioned figure, and her slender waist was so slim that it could not be held in one hand. The beautiful figure slowly walked over. She wore a pair of embroidered flower shoes with soft fox fur sewn around them. On her jade-like wrists, there were 2 shining white bracelets. When they collided with each other, they emitted a pleasant sound, making her appear even more adorable. The middle-aged man turned his head around. He was around 40 to 60 years old, with a handsome face and a heroic spirit. His skin faintly glowed, and his eyes flashed with 1,000 types of deep light. Looking at the beautiful figure that had arrived, his eyes immediately revealed a smile as he said, Mu-ha, why are you here? The second round of competition is in a few days. Are you ready? I've long since been prepared. Although those few of them are very powerful, I'm not afraid. The beautiful figure was a young girl around 18 or 19 years old. She looked at the middle-aged man and slightly raised her beautiful face. Within her lively eyes, her pupils were actually suffused with a faint purple color, fluctuating with intelligence and charming luster. Her small mouth was slightly pouted, and her cherry lips were smeared with a faint pink color like honey. Her silky black hair casually fluttered around her slender waist. What a cute and beautiful young girl. It was enough to dazzle people and make them fall head over heels in admiration. Little girl, you've been living in your grandmother's house all these years. You only came back recently to participate in the examination. Don't underestimate them. They are very strong. The middle-aged man smiled slightly, but his deep glass-like eyes showed that he had some confidence in the woman in front of him. The cute girl pursed her lips and smiled. Then, she pulled the middle-aged man's arm and said, Father, what are you thinking about? Are you thinking about Mother? Little girl, you're so mischievous. What do you know? The middle-aged man had a bitter smile on his face. He extended his hand and lightly scratched the tip of the girl's delicate nose. His eyes were filled with love. Then, the expression in his eyes changed slightly, and he said to the girl, Let me tell you something. Recently, your martial uncle plans to take in another disciple. His talent may be extraordinary. Martial uncle wants to take in another disciple? Isn't this a waste? Hearing this, the girl's beautiful eyes suddenly twitched. She was extremely surprised. Little girl, what are you talking about? If your martial uncle finds out, he'll definitely come after you. The middle-aged man smiled. Martial uncle won't bear to come after me. The girl pouted and said, if martial uncle really wants to take in a disciple, then let him. If he's pissed off, I'm afraid you'll have a headache too. I have a headache right now. The middle-aged man bitterly smiled and said, let me take a look first. Okay, don't think about those headache-inducing things. Accompany me for a walk. The girl coquettishly pulled the middle-aged man's arm. Her faint smile was enough to make people fall in love with her. 3 days passed in the blink of an eye. On the Heaven Martial Square, Yi Xian was going to fight with Elder Gu Qingyang's new disciple. Moreover, there were mid-grade Dao tools and king-grade mysterious pills as the stakes. This not only attracted the attention of many disciples of the Manchu, but also many elders, protectors, deacons, and other people. 3 days later, in the early morning after dawn, the light and darkness separated. The light gathered in the sky. The thick clouds covered the sky. Then, the light broke through the clouds, causing cracks to appear. Rays of rose-red silver light burst out. Then, the sky brightened. The Heaven Martial Square was vast. It was surrounded by continuous mountains. It was located in a vast valley. Perhaps a lot of mountains were flattened in order to create such a vast square. It was large enough to accommodate the bodies of tens of thousands of beasts. As far as the eye could see, people couldn't help but be shocked. Early in the morning, many people gathered around the Heaven Martial Square. It was densely packed and bustling with noise. What's the background of that Du Xiaofu? He actually dares to fight with Yi Xian. To be accepted as a disciple by Elder Gu Qingyang, I'm afraid he's not simple. Being able to arrange a 6-star beginner rune array means that he's definitely not an ordinary person. However, Du Xiaofu is a talisman master. As long as Yi Xian doesn't give him a chance, this kind of one-on-one battle will definitely be extremely disadvantageous for a talisman master. Let's wait and see the final result. I want to see how extraordinary he is to be accepted as a disciple by Elder Gu Qingyang. I feel that he shouldn't be too extraordinary. Otherwise, he wouldn't have accepted Elder Gu Qingyang as his master. Although Elder Gu Qingyang's status is high in the ancient heaven sect, who doesn't know that the disciple under Elder Gu Qingyang is TSK. Discussions rang out one after another, causing the Heaven Martial Square to be in an uproar. Usually, the Heaven Martial Square would be filled with the sounds of fighting early in the morning. But today, everyone seemed to have a tacit understanding as they waited for the two people to appear. Today, Yi Xian and the legendary Du Xiaofu were the main characters of the Heaven Martial Square. On a quiet mountain peak, early in the morning, the surroundings were shrouded in clouds and occasionally revealed mountain rocks. It was like a fairyland. Whoosh whoosh, a purple-robed youth that seemed to be 17 or 18 years old had a resolute face. His eyes were clear and deep as he leaped around. Hand seals were formed in his hands as his index and middle fingers came together, drawing out streaks of sword light. Using his fingers as a sword, he seemed to be cultivating a set of sword techniques. Streaks of sword light were faintly discernible on Du Xiaofu's fingertips. Profound energy fluctuated as the sword light flashed out arcs, as if a long sword was displaying a sword technique. However, the sword technique didn't carry any aura, as if it couldn't resonate with profound energy. It shouldn't be like this. It doesn't seem right. It shouldn't be like this. Du Xiaofu withdrew his hand seals as he stood quietly with a face filled with doubt. His gaze was dull for a long time, as if he was pondering about something. Chapter 605. In the past 3 days, Du Xiaofu had been comprehending the sword manual. However, the more he comprehended the Bright Saint sword manual, the more confused Du Xiaofu became. He also felt that the Bright Saint sword manual was vast and mysterious. Du Xiaofu was also shocked. The ancestor of the ancient heaven sect who could create the Bright Saint sword manual was definitely not a simple person. As Du Xiaofu comprehended every move and stance of the sword technique, his heart and mind trembled. The more he comprehended, the more Du Xiaofu felt that the sword moves were familiar to him. However, he felt that he was unfamiliar with them. The profound sword moves seemed simple, but they contained everything. There were a few sword moves that Du Xiaofu felt that he was about to master. However, all of a sudden, he felt that they were completely unfamiliar. He felt that he was comprehending the wrong sword moves. There were a total of 6 sword moves, and they contained endless possibilities. However, they also seemed to have traces of the knife and hammer techniques. They were extremely profound. For the past 3 days, Du Xiaofu had been immersed in comprehending the Bright Saint Sword Manual. But now that he thought about it, Du Xiaofu felt that he didn't seem to have comprehended anything. Everything that he had comprehended seemed to have been forgotten in an instant without a trace. Junior brother, why haven't you left yet? It's time to go to the Sky Marshal Plaza. Just as he was pondering, Du Xiaofu heard his third senior brother, Yuanli's voice from afar. Only 3 days? Du Xiaofu narrowed his eyes. There was no time in cultivation. These 3 days had passed in the blink of an eye. Boom! The vast Tianwu Square was bustling with noise and excitement. Sounds of discussion could be heard all around. It didn't take long for the Tianwu Plaza to be filled with a sea of people. Densely packed figures surrounded the plaza. There were even quite a few inner sect disciples that appeared on the Tianwu Plaza. However, the inner sect disciples were all clustered together and were clearly separated from the outer sect disciples, occupying the most spacious area. The formation of the inner sect disciples wasn't something that the outer sect disciples could casually approach. Even the outer sect disciples didn't dare to approach. If they provoked the inner sect disciples could directly deal with them on the Sky Marshal Plaza. On the square, a young man in short robes stood quietly with his eyes slightly closed, as if he was waiting for something. His face was quite handsome, and the aura on his body was quite cold. However, it attracted the gazes of many female outer sect disciples. Yixian was an expert on the inner sect's bronze ranking. Being in the top 30 of the bronze ranking was enough to prove his strength and status in the Manchu. Far away from the Tianwu Square, in the surrounding mountains, there were many figures with powerful auras standing on a mountain peak. There were quite a number of people on the mountain peak. Although their auras were concealed and not leaked out, one could still feel that they were a group of extremely powerful people. Among the crowd, there was an old man in his 70s with fluttering white hair and a white beard. He was Elder Gu Qingyang. Beside Elder Gu Qingyang, Elder Hu Sankuan, Elder Chang Mingze, Elder Kong, and the others were among the crowd. Elder Gu, your new disciple hasn't arrived yet. Could it be that he's so scared that he doesn't dare to come? If that's the case, then I won't be polite with your middle-grade Dao artifact and 2 king-grade mysterious elixir pills. Looking at Du Xiaofu, who had yet to arrive, Elder Kong revealed a smile. Elder Kong was naturally aware of the strength of his disciple, Yixian. Yixian had broken through to the mysterious level of Martial King realm some time ago. In addition to his extraordinary talent and various means, even if he encountered those rogue cultivators of the Nirvana realm of Martial King realm outside, he would be able to contend with them. Although Du Xiaofu could set up a 6-star beginner-level talisman array, if he were to face a cultivator of the same level, as long as he didn't have the chance to set up a talisman array, he would only be abused in a one-on-one battle. Moreover, Yixian's cultivation was 1 level higher than his. Therefore, Elder Kong was very confident that Du Xiaofu had yet to appear because he was so scared that he didn't dare to come. Bullshit. Why wouldn't my disciple come? He's just afraid that your disciple will lose too early, so he's a little late. Elder Gu Qingyang immediately shouted. He didn't give Elder Kong any face. At that moment, he couldn't help but secretly smile. His disciple had already slaughtered Martial King Nirvana realm cultivators. Now, would he be afraid of a Martial King mysterious level cultivator who had just broken through? He would cry later. When the surrounding experts heard Elder Gu Qingyang's words, they could only feel helpless. Elder Gu Qingyang seemed to have a sage-like appearance, but everyone knew that the Elder Gu Qingyang in front of them was definitely not sage-like. Swoosh swoosh in the air, 2 figures flew over. After a few flashes, they arrived in the air. They were Yuanli and Du Xiaofu. Junior brother, the Sky Marshal Plaza is below. I believe that Yixian is already waiting for you. You should be careful. After Yu Wanli finished speaking to Du Xiaofu, his figure leaped towards the mountain peak in front of him. Du Xiaofu nodded his head mechanically and landed on the plaza. His mind was still thinking about the sword moves in the Bright Saint Sword Manual. Chi-Chi, as Du Xiaofu's figure landed on the Sky Marshal Plaza, his mind was still thinking about the Bright Saint Sword Manual. He didn't pay attention, and when he landed, he staggered and almost fell on the plaza. The people around the plaza who had arrived earlier had already waited for quite some time. Their hearts were already feeling impatient. There were also sounds of discussion. They were afraid that Du Xiaofu wouldn't dare to come to the Sky Marshal Plaza and embarrass himself in front of everyone. Is he Du Xiaofu? The new disciple of Elder Gu Qingyang. So it's him? What a lucky guy. At this moment, when they saw the resolute and determined young man who suddenly landed on the plaza, many young men and women in the crowd faintly laughed. Du Xiaofu actually couldn't even stand after landing. Could he really contend against Yi Xian? What a powerful talisman array and restriction. Landing on the square, Du Xiaofu looked at the densely packed figures around him. All of them were young men and women who could be called geniuses in the outside world. Many of them had exceptionally powerful auras. However, what attracted Du Xiaofu's attention the most at this moment were the traces of talisman arrays and restriction energy that Du Xiaofu could feel. Under Du Xiaofu's sharp soul power, he could see that the entire Sky Marshal Square was surrounded by glyph arrays and restrictions. The entire Sky Marshal Square was secretly wrapped in them. These talisman arrays and restrictions weren't offensive. They were just a special defensive method. Ordinary energy attacks wouldn't be able to shake the ground of the plaza. Master, junior brother is here. Yu Wanli's figure landed on the mountain peak and stood respectfully behind Elder Gu Qingyang. It's that brat. It's really that brat. Following the appearance of Du Xiaofu, Elder Chang Mingze, Elder Hu Sanquin, and the others' gazes suddenly trembled. However, their gazes and expressions didn't leave any trace. They pretended that they didn't know Du Xiaofu, who was on the plaza. Is that Elder Gu's new disciple? He's quite young. However, it seems that he was a little timid just now. On the mountain peak, many experts' gazes were filled with curiosity and complexity. They sized up Du Xiaofu, who was on the plaza, from afar. Just now, Du Xiaofu's stumbling naturally couldn't escape the gazes of these experts. Haha, it seems that Du Xiaofu's legs are weak from fear. Elder Gu, I'm afraid that you'll lose today. Seeing that Du Xiaofu actually stumbled on the ground, Elder Kong immediately laughed loudly. In his heart, he felt that his chances of winning had increased. Bullshit. Whose legs are weak? In my opinion, your disciple's heart is probably trembling from fear. If you surrender now, I won't give you the mid-grade Dao tool. What do you think? Elder Gu Qingyang looked at Elder Kong and said, Elder Qingyang is actually so nice. This isn't normal. It seems that Elder Qingyang really doesn't have the confidence to win. Hearing Elder Gu Qingyang's words, many experts' gazes immediately turned. According to their understanding of Elder Gu Qingyang was definitely not so nice. If his disciple could win, Elder Gu Qingyang would definitely not be so nice. Haha, Elder Gu, you must be joking. Everyone knows who will win and who will lose. If Elder Gu admits defeat now, I can consider not taking your 2 king-grade mysterious elixirs. However, I must take that mid-grade Dao tool. Hearing Elder Gu's words, Elder Kong returned a smile. He appeared to be extremely happy, as if victory was already in his hands. Elder Kong, what do you mean? Don't tell me that you think my disciple will lose? Elder Gu Qingyang's expression immediately showed that he was not going to let Elder Kong go. He then looked at the numerous figures around him and asked, What do you all think? Don't tell me that my disciple will lose to his disciple? Being stared at by Elder Gu Qingyang like this, the crowd didn't know what to say for a moment. They looked at each other helplessly. In fact, everyone knew that Elder Qingyang's disciple had lost to someone else's disciple. This wasn't the first time that Elder Qingyang's disciple had lost to someone else's disciple. There was nothing strange about it. Haha. Seeing this, Elder Kong laughed in satisfaction. He looked at Elder Gu Qingyang and said, Elder Gu, everyone knows in their hearts. There's no need to make things difficult for everyone. Your disciple is not weak, but, ha ha ha, humph. Looking at Elder Kong's laughing face, Elder Gu Qingyang snorted coldly. Then, Elder Gu Qingyang looked at the many experts around him with an ugly expression. He slightly raised his eyebrows and said in a deep voice, "It seems that you all think my disciple will lose. Humph, a bunch of people without foresight. If you all think so, why don't I bet a few more Dao tools and King Grade elixirs with you?" Today's update is complete. Chapter 606. Elder Qingyang, I'm afraid you won't have that many pills and Dao tools to compensate. An old man in a long robe looked at Elder Gu Qingyang. He suspected that Elder Gu Qingyang wouldn't have that many pills and Dao tools to compensate. Why? You don't believe me? If you dare to bet, I'll compensate you even if I have to go bankrupt. Let me tell you, my disciple will definitely win. Whoever bets will lose. Elder Gu Qingyang gritted his teeth and argued until his face turned red. When the surrounding experts saw Elder Gu Qingyang's expression, they turned to look at the purple-robed young man on the square, who was still young and had almost fallen to the ground. Their expressions all changed. All right, I'll bet. One mid-grade Dao tool. Finally, a blue-robed man couldn't help but place a bet. From his understanding of Elder Gu Qingyang, Elder Gu Qingyang's disciple had never won. Since Elder Gu Qingyang accepted the bet, he would be an idiot if he didn't take advantage of the situation. He decisively placed his bet. I don't have many Dao tools. I'll bet 3 King-grade mysterious pills. Hee, Elder Gu. I'll bet 1 mid-grade Dao tool and 3 King-grade mysterious pills. I still have 10 King-grade initial ascension medicinal pills. Let's bet. Following the first person's bet, many experts in the surroundings immediately became interested. Elder Gu Qingyang's confidence made the crowd even more doubtful of Elder Gu Qingyang. The main reason was that all the experts present knew that none of Gu Qingyang's disciples had ever won when they competed with others. This included his third disciple, Yu Wanli. You all really want to bet? Elder Gu Qingyang was stunned when he saw everyone placing their bets. He looked at everyone. Of course, I'll add a King-grade Permetha pill. Seeing Elder Gu Qingyang's expression, he seemed to be a bit flustered. The yellow-clothed old man was even more certain that even Elder Gu Qingyang himself was not confident. If he did not take advantage of the situation now, it would be difficult for him to have another chance in the future. One had to know that this was the last time Elder Gu Qingyang would accept a disciple. The sect leader had already said that Elder Gu Qingyang would only accept one disciple. Me too. I'll bet a mid-grade Dao tool. The surrounding experts all placed their bets. It seemed like they wanted to split Elder Gu Qingyang's wealth today. In the crowd, there were only a few experts such as Hu Sanquin and Yu Wanli. They didn't say anything, and they were determined not to place their bets. Although Elder Hu Sanquin and the others knew that Yixian's cultivation wasn't weak, the strange scene in the examination area was still vivid in their minds. That purple-robed youth was too strange. He was facing a Beast Lord Realm Demonic Beast, and a 6-star initial ascension array, as if they were nothing. Although Hu Sanquin and the other elders couldn't be sure that the purple-robed youth would win, the outcome of the battle with Yixian was definitely unpredictable. This is going to be troublesome. Little junior brother, you have to work hard. Otherwise, Master will go bankrupt. Yu Wanli had been standing behind his master. Seeing his master accept so many bets, he couldn't help but break out in cold sweat. On the mountain peak, a bunch of experts were placing their bets fervently. On the square, Du Xiaofu also recovered from his comprehension of the Bright Saint Sword manual. He looked at Yixian, the youth in short clothes, and raised his eyebrows slightly. Sensing Du Xiaofu's arrival, Yixian opened his slightly closed eyes. There was a faint chill in his eyes as he looked at the purple-robed youth in front of him with a slight smile on his face. Yixian's smile seemed to contain some coldness and mockery. He looked at Du Xiaofu and said, "Kid, you must be very proud in your heart right now. You must be very amazing to be able to become Elder Gu Qingyang's disciple. Unfortunately, there will be a time when you regret it." For example, right now, Yixian didn't hide his mockery in his indifferent words. 3 days ago, he couldn't stand the indifferent expression on the purple-robed youth's face. He was just a newcomer. Did he think that just because he joined the ancient Sky Sect and became Elder Gu Qingyang's disciple, he was a generation higher than them? Yixian had been waiting for this day for the past few days. He wanted to defeat this purple-robed youth and let this kid know that even if he joined the ancient sky sect, he still had to rely on absolute strength. In a while, in the face of absolute strength, the purple-robed youth would reveal a look of despair and fear. Defeating Elder Gu Qingyang's disciple would add a lot of points in the Manchu. Can we start now? Yixian was thinking about what would happen in a while. Unfortunately, Du Xiaofu's reaction was beyond his expectations. Du Xiaofu still had the same indifferent expression. In fact, Yixian could even read a kind of disdain and contempt for him from this indifferent expression. This made Yixian's face stiffen. Kid, I'll tell you today that even if you become Elder Gu Qingyang's disciple, in the ancient sky sect, everything is based on strength. Without absolute strength, it's useless to be anyone's disciple. Yixian's eyes flickered coldly on his slightly stiff face. When can we start? Du Xiaofu looked at Yixian in front of him. He really wanted to finish this quickly, so that he could go back and comprehend the Bright Saint Sword Manual. Along the way, he seemed to have comprehended something. If he was late, he might forget it again. As Du Xiaofu's voice faded, Yixian's face became even more unsightly. The other party didn't put him in his eyes at all. This was definitely not what he had expected. In Yixian's imagination, after Du Xiaofu arrived, facing his martial king mysterious realm aura, it was enough to make him tremble in fear. As you wish, let's start now. As Yixian's cold words fell, his figure turned into a stream of light and directly swept towards Du Xiaofu. Behind him, the space fluctuated as waves of profound energy erupted. At this moment, Yixian no longer restrained his martial king mysterious realm aura and swept out. The mysterious runes on the talisman spread out and emitted an astonishing pressure to suppress Du Xiaofu. Sure enough, the martial king mysterious realm is amazing. Looking at the imposing storm that swept out from Yixian's body in the middle of the square, many of the ancient heaven sect's disciples were envious and shocked. Qin Mingyin. With a light shout, Yixian's hair fluttered behind his back. A palm print suddenly condensed in his hand, and the faint sound of wind and thunder resounded. A terrifying palm print condensed from the mysterious runes of the talisman suddenly slammed towards Du Xiaofu. Obviously, Yixian knew that Du Xiaofu was a talisman array master, so he would never allow Du Xiaofu to have the opportunity to set up a talisman array. As a talisman array master, if he didn't have the opportunity to set up a talisman array, it was equivalent to half of his cultivation being crippled. In front of him, he could only be abused. Boom! The palm print rumbled and shook the space. It was like a meteorite falling. The energy caused the space to undulate, as if it wanted to destroy the space. It was terrifying. Too shameless. This is equivalent to a sneak attack. On the mountain peak in the distance, Elder Gu Qingyang cursed loudly. Yixian's instantaneous attack naturally couldn't escape his observation. Elder Gu, this is a contest. Don't tell me you want to have a toast first? Elder Kong didn't take it seriously and was full of smiles. Yixian's instantaneous attack didn't allow Du Xiaofu to set up a talisman array. It was equivalent to winning half of the battle. Rumble. The palm print collapsed and instantly arrived in front of Du Xiaofu. The terrifying energy almost destroyed the space. The air billowed and shook people's souls. Yixian was at the mysterious realm of the Martial King realm. Although he had just broken through the mysterious realm of the Martial King realm, as a talented person and trained by the ancient heaven sect, his strength was definitely extraordinary. It was almost comparable to the Nirvana realm of the Martial King realm in the outside world. At this moment, around the Tianwu Square, countless eyes were fixed on the purple-robed young man. They were fixated on whether the purple-robed young man could contend with Yixian, who was ranked in the top 30 of the bronze list. It was a long story, but everything happened in the blink of an eye. As the crowd watched, the terrifying palm print appeared in front of Du Xiaofu. At the same time, a mysterious aura spread out from Du Xiaofu's body. Tisk. Within Du Xiaofu's originally clear and bright eyes, waves of strange talisman patterns suddenly shot out. Then, like 1,000 rays of light, the talisman patterns overlapped with each other. Finally, like a dazzling sun, it enveloped the entire sky and spread out. At this moment, a strange scene occurred. The terrifying palm print formed by Yi Xian stopped in front of Du Xiaofu the moment it was illuminated by the light in Du Xiaofu's eyes. Then, the palm print dissipated. At the same time, Yi Xian's eyes, which were filled with cold stars, became dull and his face seemed to be frozen. Inside and outside, many people were watching in shock. Du Xiaofu moved. He took a big step forward as if there was nothing. It seemed slow, but it was actually as fast as lightning. Then, he raised his hand slightly and a fist print landed on Yi Xian's chest. In an instant, a shocking aura burst out. Bang, bang, bang. A low muffled sound came from Yi Xian's chest, one after another. There were a total of 13 sounds. Waves of shocking energy waves had a total of 13 layers. The layers overlapped, and the aura was almost multiplied. Like a shock wave, it finally hit Yi Xian's chest fiercely. TSK, TSK, tisk. Yi Xian's body was like a kite with a broken string. He flew away in the air and spat out mouthfuls of blood. Rumble. In the end, Yi Xian's body smashed into the ground of the square. He was drenched in blood and the ground shook. However, the ground of the square was covered by a talisman array and restriction, so it was intact. Silence. The whole square was dead silent. Sluggish. Everyone's eyes were sluggish. Yi Xian, who was ranked in the top 30 of the bronze list and was at the mysterious Martial King realm, was sent flying with a single blow and was seriously injured. Looking at the scene in front of them, it was like a dream. Everyone's eyes were sluggish. They were tongue-tied and dumbfounded. They were so shocked that they couldn't believe it. Chapter 607. The experts on the mountain peak were shocked. They didn't expect Yi Xian to be injured in one move. Talisman and martial arts dual cultivator. That kid is also a martial cultivator. What a strong spiritual soul. After affecting Yi Xian's soul, he injured him severely. Yi Xian lost because he underestimated his opponent, but he didn't lose unjustly. That Du Xiaofu's spiritual soul power is extraordinarily strong. What kind of eyesight did the experts on the mountain have? Naturally, nothing in the square could escape their eyes. Du Xiaofu was not only a spiritual talisman master, but also a martial cultivator. He could affect Yi Xian with his spiritual soul and injure him severely. That kid is very strong. Many experts exclaimed. To be able to defeat Yi Xian in one move, his strength was terrifying. The most shocking thing was that Du Xiaofu was only 17 or 18 years old. His talent was shocking. Elder Kong's expression was ugly. He looked at the square from afar and his eyes were about to pop out. His disciple, Yi Xian, who had just entered the Martial King realm, was defeated in one move. Elder Kong couldn't accept this. Pucci, Yi Xian fell to the ground. His mouth was red with blood. He struggled to get up but couldn't. His eyes were filled with fear. He was a completely different person from his previous high-spirited self. At this moment, Yi Xian realized that this was the opposite of what he had imagined. He became the terrified person. He didn't believe that his opponent could defeat him in one move. It was like a dream. However, the truth was right in front of him. He could not believe it. Du Xiaofu is not only a spiritual talisman master, but also a martial cultivator. What a powerful strength, so valiant. Among the inner sect disciples, many extraordinary young men and women sighed. You lost. On the square, Du Xiaofu looked at Yi Xian who couldn't stand up. Then, he left. His mind was filled with the image of the bright Saint Sword manual. He wanted to go back and comprehend it immediately. Whoosh! The purple-robed figure flew into the sky and disappeared in front of everyone's shocked gazes. Everyone in the square was surprised to see a fierce battle today. Who knew that it would end in one move? There wasn't even any excitement. However, no one regretted it. Being able to see someone who defeated Yi Xian in one move was much more satisfying than a fierce battle. Ha ha ha, my pills, my Dao weapons. Quick, take them out. On the mountain peak far away from the Sky Martial Square, Elder Gu Qingyang smiled. Elder Gu Qingyang was. Elder. Gu Qingyang, Elder. Elder Qingyang. Elder Qingyang. Elder Qingyang. Elder Qingyang. Congratulations. The Qingyang experts sighed and looked at Elder Kong helplessly. They could only blame themselves for underestimating Elder Kong's disciple. They knew Elder Gu Qingyang's temper very well. You can owe anyone but Elder Gu Qingyang. Otherwise, you won't have a peaceful life in the Manchu. There was nothing that Elder Gu Qingyang couldn't do. Even the sect lord was afraid of him. Here, one by one, the experts handed over their medicinal pills and Tao artifacts to Elder Gu Qingyang. Multicolored light filled the air, and energy rippled. Elder Gu Qingyang laughed heartily, his eyes narrowed. Dozens of king-grade medicinal pills and no less than a dozen Taoist tools were all put into Elder Gu Qingyang's Qinkuan bag, making everyone's eyes red with envy. At this point, they couldn't help but suspect that Elder Gu Qingyang Yun had set a trap for them to place their bets. Du Xiaofu defeated Yi Xian in one move. As his master, Elder Gu Qingyang Yun must know the strength of his disciple. Thinking of this, everyone felt their hearts ache. However, it was too late for regrets. They watched Elder Gu Qingyang Yun put away the Tao weapons and pills into his Qinkuan bag. Fortunately, I didn't place any bets. Yun Mingze, Hu Sankuan, and the other elders looked at each other. They were secretly happy that they didn't place any bets. They couldn't help but be envious of Elder Gu Qingyang Yun Mingze's Tao weapons and king-grade pills. For Hu Sankuan and the other elders, the most shocking thing was that Du Xiaofu had defeated Yi Xian in one move. His strength had completely exceeded their expectations. Hurry up and hand it over. You're betting 10 king-grade pills, not 8. Don't even think about taking advantage of me. And you even bet a low-grade Tao artifact. I remember that. Elder Gu Qingyang Yun Mingze shouted. Some people wanted to save a few pills and Tao weapons, but they couldn't escape Elder Gu's eyes. Gulp. Yuanli Yun Mingze couldn't help but swallow his saliva when he saw his master accept so many pills and Tao weapons. Then, his face was full of smiles. However, he wasn't as smug as Elder Gu Qingyang Yun Mingze. Elder Kong, it's your turn. Elder Gu Qingyang Yun Mingze, who had earned a lot, finally arrived in front of the gloomy Elder Kong with a smile. Elder Kong looked at Elder Gu Qingyang Yun Mingze helplessly. He could only take out a middle-grade Tao weapon and 2 king-grade mysterious pills with a pained expression. Then, he handed them to Elder Gu Qingyang Yun Mingze. He finally understood why Elder Gu Qingyang Yun Mingze was so easy to talk to that day. It turned out that he had been digging a hole for him to jump into. Kong Zhonglei. After accepting the middle-grade Tao weapon and 2 king-grade mysterious pills from Elder Kong, Elder Gu Qingyang Yun Mingze's expression changed slightly. He directly called Elder Kong's name, and his tone became heavier. He looked straight at Elder Kong and said, "My new disciple is still young. According to seniority, it's enough to call you Elder Brother. Let's forget about this matter this time. But in the future, you must warn the disciples in the sect. If anyone dares to act recklessly and something happens, don't you think so?" Hearing Elder Gu Qingyang Yun Mingze's words, the expressions of the experts in the surroundings changed slightly. The meaning behind Elder Gu Qingyang Yun Mingze's words was something that all of them had lived for so many years. How could they not understand? Elder Gu Qingyang's words were not only for Elder Kong, but also for everyone else. He wanted everyone to keep an eye on their own disciples. Whoever dared to provoke his disciple would have to bear the consequences if they were injured or crippled. If they dared to interfere, then don't blame him for being impolite. Elder Kong looked at Elder Gu Qingyang Yun Mingze, and his heart trembled slightly. Then, he had no choice but to nod his head. At this moment, Elder Kong couldn't help but curse Zhang Zhizhou and Yu Tiantian 800 times in his heart. Not only did they cause him to lose a middle-grade Tao weapon and 2 king-grade mysterious pills, but they also caused him to offend Elder Gu Qingyang Yun Mingze. One had to know that in the entire Manchu, everyone knew that Elder Gu Qingyang Yun Mingze was the most protective of his disciples. The battle on the Tianwu Square had ended. Originally, everyone thought that it would be a fierce battle, but in the end, it was a shocking battle that ended with a single move. Amidst the astonished discussions, the figures on the Tianwu Square gradually dispersed. Then, there were many figures fighting fiercely on the square. The noise was endless. There weren't many rules on the Tianwu Square to begin with. Any conflict between the disciples of the ancient Heaven sect would be resolved on the Tianwu Square. The Manchu was also happy to do so. As long as no lives were lost, they would turn a blind eye. Du Xiaofu returned to the mountain near the Tianmu Peak, where he had settled down. After setting up a forbidden seal and a glyph array, he returned to his room. This is the ancient heaven sect. It should be very safe. After sitting down cross-legged, Du Xiaofu softly muttered to himself. If this wasn't a safe place in the ancient heaven sect, one of the 9 great factions of the Central Plains, then there was probably no safe place in the entire Central Plains. After a moment of hesitation, Du Xiaofu's mind moved slightly. At this moment, there were 2 small star-like balls of light in his Niwen palace. One of them slightly trembled as it rotated. In an instant, a strange energy spread out, releasing a dazzling light in his Niwen palace, illuminating the entire place. Hula! Then, a round ball of light flew out from between Du Xiaofu's eyebrows and appeared in Du Xiaofu's hand. The mysterious runes on the round ball of light flickered, spreading a multicolored light, and an ancient aura rippled out. Looking at the ball of light in his hand, Du Xiaofu narrowed his eyes. With a thought, an ancient aura spread out from the ball of light, enveloping his entire body like a halo. The light was dazzling, and the ancient aura rippled. In the next instant, Du Xiaofu's figure appeared in a misty space. Du Xiaofu was no stranger to this space. It was a place where time was accelerated in the ancient, desolate space. One day in the outside world was 10 days in here. Outside, Du Xiaofu didn't dare to casually take out the ancient, desolate space. If someone discovered the ancient, desolate space, the consequences would be unimaginable. But at this moment, in the ancient heaven sect, Du Xiaofu's scruples were a lot less. Continue to comprehend. In the ancient desolate space, Du Xiaofu continued to comprehend the bright Saint Sword manual. Using his hand as a sword, rays of sword light condensed in his fingers as he continued to comprehend the bright Saint Sword manual. Du Xiaofu was so passionate about the bright Saint Sword manual not only because of the profoundness and vastness of the bright Saint Sword manual, but also because he felt that the sword moves on the bright Saint Sword manual were vaguely familiar to him. This kind of familiarity made Du Xiaofu want to continue to comprehend it, as if there was something waiting for him in the future. This feeling was extremely mysterious, and even Du Xiaofu couldn't describe it. He could only feel it, but there was no way to express it. Chapter 608. Whoosh whoosh. Streaks of sword radiance shot out from Du Xiaofu's fingertips. They were shaped like sword radiance as they drew arcs in the blurry space. No, I'm still missing something. 2 hours later, Du Xiaofu stopped his hand seals and stood in the blurry space in a daze. No matter how Du Xiaofu comprehended the sword moves in the bright Saint Sword manual, he always felt that something was wrong. This feeling made Du Xiaofu feel that it was not the sword moves that had a problem. Instead, it was the ancestor of the ancient heaven sect who comprehended the sword moves that seemed to have a problem when he comprehended the extraordinary sword moves. Therefore, when Du Xiaofu was comprehending and practicing, he could faintly feel that something was missing. Whoosh! Far away from the mountain peak, a figure flew through the air and stopped near the mountain peak. This kid actually set up a seal formation. The person murmured softly. Then, he looked at the mountain peak. After his gaze moved, he immediately disappeared. In the blurry space, Du Xiaofu was in a daze for a long time. In the end, Du Xiaofu was able to use the mysterious move to perfect an ordinary martial technique. Even after cultivating the lightning destruction finger and the divine light thunderstorm of the divine light court, he was able to greatly increase their power with the help of the mysterious move. However, he had not succeeded in cultivating the bright Saint Sword manual. Naturally, he could not perfect it. Before using the mysterious move to perfect a martial technique, he had to first succeed in cultivating the martial technique. This sword technique is special. There are 6 sword moves, but they can be derived from thousands of sword moves. This feeling is very familiar. Suddenly, Du Xiaofu's eyes lit up. He murmured softly, "I wonder if there will be any progress if I use the mysterious move to cultivate it." As his voice fell, Du Xiaofu formed a hand seal. Using his fingers as a sword, streaks of sword radiance shot out and drew arcs in front of him. However, at this moment, these arcs did not dissipate. Instead, They gathered together and formed a dense and mysterious rune in front of him. Swish, swish. Du Xiaofu performed the sword techniques according to the illuminating sacred sword manual. The sword rays did not disperse, but condensed and arranged, forming mysterious runes. Whoosh, whoosh. After dusk, the sky darkened. Several figures appeared in the vicinity of the mountain peak one after another. In the end, after discovering the talisman formation seal on the mountain peak, they resentfully looked away. At night, on Tianmu Peak, the moonlight shone brightly outside. However, in the small hall in the courtyard, multicolored light filled the air. Energy fluctuated as if a treasure was about to appear. Bastard, this mid-grade Dao artifact seems to be a little damaged. There's also this king-grade Permetha pill. It seems to be a semi-finished product. That bastard actually dared to trick me. In the hall, while Elder Gu Qingyang was inspecting the Dao tools and king-grade elixir pills, he was cursing non-stop. Elder Gu Qingyang realized that many of the Dao tools and elixir pills that were lost to him had some small flaws. However, this did not affect Elder Gu Qingyang's mood. Although some of the Dao tools and elixir pills had some flaws, it did not affect the quality of the items too much. He still gained a lot this time. Master, Yuanli hurriedly ran into a small hall and said to Elder Gu Qingyang, I want to find Junior Brother, but Junior Brother was probably in closed-door cultivation. The place where he lived was covered with talisman arrays and seals, so I didn't disturb him. This kid really can't stay idle. He went into seclusion. Elder Gu Qingyang raised his head slightly and was stunned. Then, he lowered his head and continued counting his Dao tools and elixir pills. He said, It's good that he went into seclusion for a few days. In the afternoon, the sect master looked for me and asked me to let that kid participate in the second round of competition. It's good to let those guys know that my disciple is not inferior to those outstanding people. However, those monsters are quite difficult to deal with this time, especially when that little monster is back. Master, Yuanli did not seem to be listening to Elder Gu Qingyang's words. He had a puzzled look on his face. Then he said to Elder Gu Qingyang, who was sitting upright and checking the Dao tools and elixir pills, I saw Yin Mingze, Hu Sankuan and the others appear nearby and then leave. What are Hu Sankuan, Yin Mingze and the others doing here? What? Elder Gu Qingyang, who was counting the Dao tools and elixir pills, suddenly changed his expression and jumped up. He glared at Yuanli and said, Quick, from now on, guard your junior brother. Don't let anyone near him, especially Yin Mingze, Hu Sankuan and the others, until your junior brother comes out of seclusion. Yes, master. Although Yuanli did not know what was wrong with his master, he did not dare to provoke him after seeing his master's expression. He immediately turned and left. This group of bastards still want to have any ideas? No way. Elder Gu Qingyang raised his eyes and seemed to have lost interest in the elixir pills and Dao tools. He hurriedly put them into his Qinkuan bag and left the courtyard that night. At night, the moon was bright and the stars were sparse. Night clouds moved across the sky, occasionally covering the moonlight and then quietly moving away. In a quiet and elegant courtyard, a black-haired, middle-aged man in green stood under the moonlight. He slightly raised his head and quietly looked at the bright moon in the sky. Under the moonlight, his thin figure appeared slender and sturdy. The middle-aged man wore a green robe and had black hair. He stood with his hands behind his back, and after a long time, a smile appeared on his face as he murmured curiously, a cultivator of both martial Dao and talisman Dao, defeating the mysterious martial emperor Yi Xian with a single move. Interesting. I would like to see how far a kid with an unknown background like you can go. Time slowly passed. In the ancient heaven sect, the news of the new disciple Du Xiaofu defeating Yi Xian of the bronze ranking in one move spread. This news immediately spread in the Manchu, shocking many disciples who did not go to the Tianwu Square that day. As the news spread in the Manchu, Du Xiaofu's identity also began to spread. It was said that Du Xiaofu was the one who took first place in the outer sect disciple test in the 8th district not long ago. He was also the mysterious kid who caused a commotion in the Manchu. He was the one who stole the limelight from Feng Xiangyu, the human king, and passed through all the tests in the 8th district as if he was unstoppable. It's said that Du Xiaofu has already arranged to participate in the second round of the competition. The second round of the competition will not be simple. Not long ago, all the inner sect disciples will have to participate. It will definitely be a fierce battle. Those outstanding talents and human kings will all show up. I wonder who will be able to last until the end of the second round. It won't be easy to last until the end. You have to know that none of the people on the bronze ranking are easy to deal with. They are all very terrifying. That's true. None of the people on the bronze ranking are easy to deal with. In the past, not many people were able to last until the end. There was a lot of discussion in the ancient heaven sect. A grand event was about to begin. Everyone was looking forward to it. At the peak of the mountain, the sun was setting, and the afterglow shone in the sky. In a separate courtyard, 3 men and 1 woman stood. The one in the front was a 22-year-old young man in a black robe. He had a handsome figure and an elegant temperament. His eyebrows were distinct, and his pure black eyes were as black as the endless abyss at the end of the universe. Does he really have the strength to defeat Ixin in one move? Behind the black-robed young man, there was a similarly extraordinary young man in a long robe. His eyes revealed a doubtful look. His temperament was outstanding, and his eyes revealed some pride. It is said that Du Xiaofu first used his spiritual soul power to affect Ixin, and then directly injured him. Under such circumstances, coupled with Ixin's carelessness, he was naturally injured. However, I feel that if Ixin had been on guard from the beginning, he wouldn't have been defeated so easily by Du Xiaofu. The black-robed young man said softly. Those pitch-black eyes seemed to make people feel as if they were about to be sucked in if they looked at them for a while. However, that kid shouldn't be weak. He cultivates both martial Dao and talisman Dao, and his talisman Dao is at the initial 6-star level. A young man, who was not very tall, but was quite cold, said, "Let's worry about the second round of the competition." The second round of the competition is about to begin. The people on the bronze ranking are not easy to deal with. If we want to stay until the end, we have to stick together. I guess they are in the other regions, discussing how to form a team at this moment. A woman said, "The people on the bronze ranking." The black-robed young man slightly raised his head, his pitch-black eyes faintly glowing. Chapter 609. Moonlit night, mountains, streams, waterfalls, flowing water. A 25 or 26-year-old man stood there quietly. Under the moonlight, his facial features were almost three-dimensional, handsome as if they were carved by a knife. His entire person emitted a kind of elegant and untainted air. The waterfall was flowing, and occasionally the spray would shoot out, but it did not stain his robe in the slightest. Those little rookies are coming to challenge us. They want me to ask for your opinion on how to play with those little rookies. A figure appeared silently. It was a young man of about the same age. He had a white face, thick eyebrows, and a tall nose. He was extremely handsome. The young man raised his head and looked at the moon in the sky. A smile appeared on his handsome face. He said softly, "They are just a bunch of rookies. What's the point of discussing? When the time comes, just follow the rules. It's just a routine. I'll just treat it as giving some guidance to my juniors." Mountains stood tall and surrounded by mountains. On a huge mountain peak surrounded by mountains, it was lush green. Clouds and mist lingered around it. The mountain stream flowed and was full of life. The room in the courtyard was ancient. A light sandalwood fragrance filled the air. It had the effect of calming one's mind. In the room, the handsome middle-aged man looked down at the message jade in his hand. Suddenly, he raised his head slightly and looked outside the door. He said, "Little Muhan, come in. Don't hide." I thought that I could hide my aura and use my grandmother's secret technique to escape from my father's prying eyes. I didn't expect it to be useless. A lovely voice sounded. It seemed to be a little disappointed. After which, an 18 or 19-year-old girl skipped into the room. She was wearing a pair of beautiful shoes that were embroidered with flower patterns and had soft fox fur sewn around them. 2 sparkling white bangles on her jade-like wrists collided with each other, emitting a pleasant sound that made her appear even more adorable. The middle-aged man raised his head and put down the jade slip in his hand. His long black hair was neatly combed into a bun, and a few strands of hair fell over his ears. He smiled and said to the lovely girl, Only you can make your grandmother make an exception and let you practice the secret techniques and martial skills of your grandmother's family. Those secret techniques of your grandmother's family are naturally not a problem. However, your cultivation is still lacking. Among your peers, or even ordinary people, I'm afraid it's not very likely that they can detect your aura. I thought it was because Grandma's secret technique wasn't good enough. The cute girl smiled sweetly. Her smile could move one's soul. Then, she lay on the middle-aged man's back and gently held his arm. She said intimately, "Father, why aren't you resting? Why aren't you resting yet?" The middle-aged man turned his head slightly and said to the cute girl, "Tomorrow is the second round of the test. Are you really ready? I'll give you some news first. Not only are Su Chuyun and the rest not to be trifled with, those fellows on the bronze list will not let you off easily according to convention. They will not be easy to pass. The few fellows on the bronze board are indeed difficult to deal with." The cute lady's pretty face hardened slightly. However, she quickly recovered her smile as she looked at the middle-aged man and said, "However, it doesn't matter. With senior brother Emochin around, those few troublesome fellows should not make things too difficult for me. Don't even think about it." The middle-aged man immediately glared at his beloved daughter. He curled his lips and said, "I have already informed them that they cannot take special care of you. Otherwise, I will not let them off so easily." "Father, how can you do this? I am your biological daughter. How can you let others bully your biological daughter? Grandma has already said that if you dare to mistreat me, I will be sent back." When she heard this, the cute girl's eyes immediately lit up. She glared fiercely at the middle-aged man with her hands on her hips. Her pink and tender red lips were slightly pouted. Her angry appearance made her appear even more adorable. It is useless even if you have your grandma protecting you. Although the middle-aged man loved his daughter, he did not seem to have any intention of compromising this time. After shooting a glance at his beloved daughter, he slightly stood up. His skinny figure appeared slender and sturdy as he opened his mouth and said, "That's right, this time. Help father keep an eye out for a person." The cute girl glared at the middle-aged man. After a while, as if she felt that there was no turning back, she pouted her small mouth and said, "Keep an eye on who?" "A little guy called Du Xiaofu," the middle-aged man said. Hearing this, the cute girl's eyes flickered. She looked at the middle-aged man and said, "Is he the disciple that martial uncle wants to take in?" "Yes, that little guy. He is a martial arts and talisman cultivator. A few days ago, he defeated Yi Xian of the mysterious martial king realm with one move. He seems to be about the same age as you. He might even be younger than you. You should keep an eye out for him," the middle-aged man said. "Is that so?" The cute girl seemed to be interested. She said, "If there is a chance, I will go and test his strength. Don't make trouble. We will talk about it when the time comes." The middle-aged man smiled and said, In the misty space, in front of Du Xiaofu, rays of sword radiance condensed and did not disperse. They outlined a dense and mysterious talisman in front of him. They were mysterious and unfathomable. The talisman flickered, as if it was changing at any time. In an instant, there were thousands of changes. Du Xiaofu could not replace the sword with his finger and condense the sword radiance without dispersing if he was not in the desolate ancient space. Coincidentally, he was in the desolate ancient space. Du Xiaofu could take the opportunity to comprehend it. At this moment, Du Xiaofu was sitting cross-legged. He raised his head slightly and looked at the mysterious talisman condensed by the sword radiance in front of him. He was immersed in comprehension. At this moment, if the people in the Stone City saw Du Xiaofu's current appearance, they would probably think that Du Xiaofu had become stupid again. After an unknown period of time, the mysterious talisman in front of Du Xiaofu began to crack. Then, like rays of sword radiance dissipating, the talisman dissipated one by one. In the end, they all disappeared in the desolate ancient space. Just as the mysterious talisman dissipated, Du Xiaofu's eyes began to shine. Buzz! In the next moment, azure gold light surged in Du Xiaofu's hand. Then, an azure gold long sword with flowing runes appeared in his hand. A domineering and fierce aura spread out and made a clanging sound. Boom! As soon as the sword appeared, the entire misty space trembled. Then, Du Du Xiaofu still seemed to be immersed in a sluggish state. Rays of sword radiance swept out from his hand. Suddenly, the sound of wind and thunder resounded. The sword radiance swept out, making clanging sounds unceasingly. Whoosh! The sword radiance swept out. Rays of sword radiance streaked across the mysterious and unfathomable arc of the vacuum. The azure gold brilliance shone brightly, almost drowning Du Xiaofu. At this moment, as the sword radiance swept out, Du Xiaofu clearly did not use a trace of profound qi. However, the sword radiance that swept out from the nimble sword body caused the space to tremble. Layers of sword radiance overlapped and bloomed. It seemed to be able to communicate with the energy of heaven and earth. Using the energy of heaven and earth, just the pure sword move contained a great amount of power. Just by relying on the sword move, it was able to release a great amount of power and communicate with the energy of heaven and earth. If there were experts present at this moment, they would be dumbfounded. What kind of sword skill was this to have such power? At this moment, if Elder Gu Qingyang saw this scene, he would be so shocked that his jaw would drop. If Elder Gu Qingyang was present, he would realize that the Bright Saint sword manual that he had cultivated for over 100 years was obviously different from the sword move that Du Xiaofu was using. And if he observed carefully, it seemed that the sword move that Du Xiaofu had comprehended and cultivated was closer to returning to one's original state. Of course, at this moment, it was impossible to accurately say that the sword move that Du Xiaofu was using was definitely stronger than Elder Gu Qingyang's sword move. It was like two students were looking at a drawing. One student copied the original drawing very well, but the other student was looking at the original drawing and had already started to draw his own style. Flower splitting brushing willow, yang past 3 stacks, whirlwind scattering clouds, violent sword gale, furious sword cutting yang, holy sword roar. From his mouth, he murmured. Du Xiaofu's figure leaped and his sword moved. The sword radiance contained seal, turn, trip, lead, poke, entangle, and chop. The dazzling green and gold talisman patterns bloomed like the golden feathers of a golden-winged rock. Together with the power of the sword move, the aura became even more domineering and frightening. The sword moves were continuous and endlessly derived. The sword radiance was monstrous and the light covered the entire space. Gradually, one could only see a long sword in the misty space. It was like a spiritual python, a flood dragon soaring into the sky, and a rock shaking the sky. The long sword moved. There was a hint of spirituality in the domineering aura. There was a hint of demonic charm in the ancient style. The sword moves were incomparably profound, communicating with the heavens and earth. After practicing the sword moves for an unknown period of time, Du Xiaofu's figure finally stopped. The sword radiance in his hand retracted, and the tyrant shadow was also retracted back into his body. Walala! In the surrounding misty space, the streaks of sword light slowly disappeared in the space. Chi-chi! As the sword radiance disappeared, a faint golden light spread out from Du Xiaofu's eyes. An ancient and domineering aura also swept out from his thin body, causing the surrounding space to tremble. Who? A long breath came out from his stomach. Du Xiaofu's resolute and determined face slowly revealed a faint smile. He muttered to himself, "I've finally comprehended the Bright Saint Sword Manual." Chapter 6:10. Soon after, Du Xiaofu's smile turned into a doubtful one. He muttered, "But it seems like it's not enough. This sword technique shouldn't be like this." Du Xiaofu felt that the 6 sword moves in the Bright Sage Sword Manual still had a feeling that they were not fully expressed. To Du Xiaofu, this kind of feeling was like a mysterious move. The more he comprehended it, the more profound and vast he felt. Du Xiaofu felt that if he were to comprehend more in the future, he should be able to improve further on the sword techniques in the Bright Saint Sword Manual. However, this kind of understanding was not something he could achieve in a short period of time. After thinking for a while, Du Xiaofu packed up. He did not know how much time had passed outside, but he immediately left the ancient desolate space. After keeping the ancient desolate space into his mind's Niwen palace, he opened the seal and seal that he set up. The morning sun shone brightly, and the air on the mountain peak was fresh. Suddenly, Du Xiaofu's face turned serious. He looked in front of him and saw a figure flying towards him. "Little Junior, you finally came out." As Wanli's anxious voice sounded, his figure immediately landed beside Du Xiaofu. His expression was rather anxious, as though he had not been waiting for a long time. He said, "If you still did not come out, I would not have been able to resist the urge to barge in." Seeing Yu Wanli's anxious expression, Du Xiaofu was stunned. He asked, "Third senior, what happened? You have been in seclusion for 4 days. Today is the day of the second round." Yu Wanli saw Du Xiaofu and heaved a sigh of relief. 4 days in seclusion? Only 40 days. When Du Xiaofu heard this, he was slightly stunned. 4 days in the outside world was only 40 days in the ancient desolate space. Du Xiaofu originally thought that he would be in seclusion for a long time, but now that he thought about it, 40 days seemed to be quite long. He raised his head and asked Yu Wanli, "Third senior brother, what is the second round?" "You don't know?" Yu Wanli was a little puzzled. He turned to Du Xiaofu and said, "You were the champion of District 8 in the Manchu Outer Sect Disciple Test, so you have to participate in the second round. There are benefits to this. Follow me. I'll explain to you on the way." Whoosh whoosh, Du Xiaofu nodded, and then the two figures flew into the sky. After a few flashes, they disappeared in the sky. Along the way, Du Xiaofu learned from his third senior brother, Yu Wanli, what the second round was. In the second round of the competition, those who had just become inner sect disciples would compete against each other for the second time. However, the second round of the competition wasn't simple. It was extremely complicated. First, they had to compete with the experts on the bronze roll for a type of energy copper talisman. It was said that the energy copper talisman was a necessary item to enter the bronze roll. The ancient heaven sect had 3 rolls: the gold roll, the silver roll, and the bronze roll. Under Du Xiaofu's questioning, he found out from third senior brother Yu Wanli that the disciples on the gold roll had become inner sect disciples 3 years ago. The disciples on the silver roll had become inner sect disciples in the second year. As for the disciples on the bronze roll, they had only become inner sect disciples last year. There were only 100 names on each of the 3 rankings, and it was similar to Tianwu Academy's martial ranking. Those who could enter the gold, silver, and bronze rolls were all powerful individuals. They were all absolute geniuses in the outside world. The ancient heaven sect had 3 special spaces: the gold ancient space, the silver ancient space, and the bronze ancient space. The 3 spaces corresponded to the 3 batches of disciples. Within each space, there were all sorts of martial techniques, talisman arrays, beast energy, and secret techniques. However, the martial techniques, talisman arrays, beast energy, and secret techniques in the silver ancient space were superior to the bronze ancient space, but inferior to the gold ancient space. If one wanted to enter the 3 spaces, they had to use the gold, silver, and bronze energy talismans. Otherwise, they would be expelled. In the second round of the competition, the disciples on the bronze roll would compete for the energy copper talismans. In this round of competition, the Manchu would give out 3 months' worth of energy copper talismans to each inner sect disciple who participated in the competition. However, the disciples on the bronze roll would have a legitimate reason to snatch their energy copper talismans. They only had to leave behind 10 days' worth of energy copper talismans. According to Yu Wanli, snatching energy copper talismans had always been a tradition in the ancient heaven sect. A few decades ago, when he had just become an inner sect disciple, he had also been snatched by a disciple on the bronze roll. However, as long as he could last 7 days, the disciples on the bronze roll would no longer be able to snatch energy copper talismans. After 7 days, the 128 people with the most remaining energy copper talismans would be able to continue participating in the competition and fight for the top 16. The top 16 winners would have a chance to enter the ancient heaven sect's secret area to forge. The champion would even be able to obtain a high-grade Taoist weapon. Du Xiaofu's interest was piqued at the thought of obtaining such benefits. Early in the morning, in the ancient heaven sect, the morning clouds rose and thousands of mountains woke up. In a vast expanse of green mountains, milky white clouds drifted along the mountain sides. Under the morning sun, the clouds reflected the mountain ranges, and the clouds poured down in torrents. Among the mountains, in front of a rather spacious valley, there were many outstanding young men and women standing quietly. Under the morning sun, each of them looked valiant and valiant. The number of young men and women was not small. There were about 800 of them, and less than 1,000 of them. However, each of them had an extraordinary temperament. Regardless of whether it was their clothes or temperament, they were all outstanding. Any one of these young men and women could be considered absolute geniuses in the outside world. At this moment, there were many middle-aged men and old men standing in front of these young men and women. Each of them had an extremely powerful aura. Judging from the badges on their shoulders, they were the protectors and deacons of the ancient heaven sect. Looking at the hundreds of young disciples in front of them, the protectors and deacons looked satisfied. These were the future of the ancient heaven sect. This year's inner sect disciples were even more talented than the previous years. There were actually several human kings and quite a few geniuses. This was enough to make them feel satisfied. One valley, 2 churches, and all spiritual and martial arts. 3 sects and 3 factions shook the Central Plains. This sentence referred to the 9 great forces of the Central Plains, and the ancient heaven sect was one of them. The reason why the ancient heaven sect's name shook the Central Plains was because of the endless supply of new blood. The ancient heaven sect continued to become more and more powerful, allowing the ancient heaven sect to become more and more prosperous. Any disciple who walked out of the ancient heaven sect was never a simple person. They were all peak existences among their peers. In front of the hundreds of extraordinary young disciples, the dozen or so young men and women standing at the front were even more outstanding. These dozen or so people standing in front of the extraordinary people made the hundreds of extraordinary peers behind them feel reverence. They didn't feel anything wrong. This was because they all knew that any one of these dozen or so people was absolutely outstanding among them. Strength was respect. It was that simple and could be applied everywhere. Fortunately, they haven't left yet. Otherwise, we would have missed it. In the distance, Yuanli looked at the figures standing in the valley and breathed a sigh of relief. He stopped in the air and said to Du Xiaofu, who was beside him, "Take out your badge and wear it on your chest." Hearing this, Du Xiaofu took out the Manchu badge and pinned it on his chest. The badge was only the size of a child's palm. It emitted a faint fluorescent light. Immediately, a red object appeared in Yuanli's hand. It was rectangular, the length of an adult's palm, and the width of 2 fingers. Some complicated talisman patterns were engraved on it. Qi as the hand seal condensed, the red object directly entered Du Xiaofu's badge like a stream of light and disappeared. Du Xiaofu could clearly see that a total of 9 scarlet items had entered the badge on his chest and disappeared. After doing all this, Yuanli said to Du Xiaofu, "These are 9 copper energy talismans that Master has arranged for you. Each copper energy talisman can last you 10 days in the ancient bronze space. At that time, the people on the bronze list will rob you of your copper energy talismans. If you can't beat them, then obediently hand them over. Otherwise, you will suffer greatly. Just keep the last one. When there is only 1 copper energy talisman left in the badge, it will turn red. At that time, the people on the bronze list will not rob you. However, you will be at the bottom of the list." Du Xiaofu nodded. He roughly understood what Yuanli said. "Go. Wait for a while. When the time comes, enter the sealed space with them. Strive to obtain a good result and make Master proud, and also make me, your senior, proud." Seeing this, Yuanli lightly smiled and said, "Senior, I'll be going." Du Xiaofu nodded to his 3rd senior. Then, his figure flashed into the valley and quietly landed behind the hundreds of people. In front of the crowd, many protectors and deacons raised their heads slightly. When they saw Du Xiaofu quietly land in the crowd, some people's eyes secretly moved. However, they did not say anything and pretended not to see anything. Swish, swish, many young men and women felt the slight fluctuation of aura. The surrounding gazes immediately fell on Du Xiaofu. 6:00 in the morning. I've been working hard all night, asking for flowers, support, and recommendations. Thank you to all my readers. Chapter 6:11. It's him, Du Xiaofu. He defeated Du Xiaofu, Yi Xian from the bronze roll in one move. Rumor has it that he is the champion of the 8th test area. He defeated the mortal king, Feng Xiangyu. Naturally, he will participate in the 2nd test. After defeating Yi Xian in the Sky Marshal Square, some people immediately recognized Du Xiaofu. Whispers of discussion spread out and immediately caused some commotion in the crowd. At the same time, there were many auras in the sky that attracted everyone's attention. Swoosh, swoosh. Everyone raised their heads and saw over a dozen figures flying towards them. Soon after, they landed in front of the crowd. All of them appeared calm and composed. Even the air did not fluctuate. However, the invisible aura they emitted was sufficient to cause one's heart to tremble. The dozens of people who came were all middle-aged and above. Most of them were elders. This group of strong people were Elder Gu Qingyang, Elder Changming Zhe, Elder Hu Sankuan, and the others. Greetings, elders. All the disciples bowed respectfully with respect in their eyes. Rise. A middle-aged elder took a step forward and looked at the hundreds of disciples standing quietly in front of him. He said, "First of all, I would like to congratulate all of you for becoming inner sect disciples. It also confirms that all of you are talented." His voice paused for a moment before the middle-aged elder changed the topic. He said, "Becoming an inner sect disciple is nothing to be happy about. Whether you are a dragon or a worm depends on the future. A temporary achievement does not mean forever. If all of you do not work hard, it will not be long before countless people who were slower than you will surpass you and step on you." Hearing this, all the young men and women seemed to be touched. Many of their eyes were filled with brilliance. "All right, I will talk to all of you later. I believe the protectors have already explained the rules to all of you. After the giant rock space is opened, all of you will enter it. Run as far as you can. The people on the bronze roll will enter soon after. At that time, all of you will have a hard time. The test in the giant rock space will last for a total of 7 days. After 7 days, the 128 people with the most points will be qualified to enter the next round. The losers will have to work hard on their own." After the middle-aged elder finished speaking, he turned around and nodded slightly at Elder Gu Qingyang behind him. Elder Gu Qingyang nodded and waved his long sleeve. "Open the giant rock space." Swish, swish. Whooshing sounds rang out as rays of light condensed from the hands of several elders. They gathered in the air above the valley before turning into runes and disappearing. Boom! Suddenly, the mountain valley trembled. Spatial waves rolled out and the rocks trembled. In front of the mountain valley, spatial ripples split apart. After that, a crack appeared and rapidly expanded. The giant rock space has been opened. I heard that there are no living creatures or trees inside. There are only misty suns, moons, stars, mountains, and rocks. That place is used to test the disciples of the Manchu. A disciple exclaimed in surprise. Everyone's attention was focused on the spatial crack. Walala! The cracks in the space spread out and finally formed a spatial gate, revealing a vast mountain range. The space inside was rather gray, but the surroundings of the spatial ripples were glistening with light. Swish, swish. Following the spatial ripples, the dozen or so outstanding young men and women in front of the mountain valley had already taken the lead to rush in. They passed through the glistening space, and their figures disappeared within. Swish, swish. When the surrounding people saw this, they no longer hesitated. Numerous figures surged with profound qi and swarmed in. Their figures rushed into the giant rock space. This included Du Xiaofu. Following the crowd, his figure was wrapped in a faint golden light and swiftly entered the giant rock space. Is this the giant rock space? The giant rock space was like another world. When Du Xiaofu entered the giant rock space, he was also rather surprised for a moment. His vision was hazy, and there was no green vegetation in the space. As far as the eye could see, there were only huge rocks and vast mountain ranges. There was a sense of desolation everywhere. Swish, swish. When the surrounding figures entered the giant rock space, they immediately scattered into the distance. Not many people stayed, and in a short period of time, more than half of them had disappeared. The experts on the bronze roll were about to enter the giant rock space. They could only find a place to hide as soon as possible. Once they encountered the experts on the bronze roll, one could imagine the consequences. It would be difficult to protect the energy copper talismans. Figure after figure hurriedly rushed forward. Du Xiaofu could only follow behind. Du Xiaofeng could guess from Yi Xian's cultivation and strength that if he were to encounter the 100 people on the bronze leaderboard alone, he would definitely not have an easy time. Even though he didn't know the strength of the people on the bronze leaderboard, but from Yi Xian's cultivation and strength, Du Xiaofeng could guess that if he were to encounter all the people on the bronze leaderboard alone, it would definitely not be easy. Haha, from what I see, those rookies are all fleeing forward. In front of the valley, Elder Qian Ming's face carried a smile as he said, "They still don't know that the giant rock space is divided into 7 regions. Every night, the 7 regions will change and shift. No matter where they flee, they will encounter the people on the bronze roll. I wonder who will be the champion this time." This year's batch of people are all extraordinarily talented. In particular, those few are even more outstanding. Elder Hu Sankuan sighed. Today's batch of disciples is indeed not bad. Elder Gu Qingyang nodded in agreement. It was undeniable that the talents of this year's batch of disciples were extremely strong. When he heard Elder Gu Qingyang's words, the eyes of a long-robed elder in the crowd secretly moved. He looked at Elder Gu Qingyang and embarrassedly said, "Elder Gu Qingyang, what rank do you think your disciple Du Xiaofu will be able to obtain this time? Will he be able to enter the top 2, or even the champion?" "Humph, my disciple will definitely have no problem. It will be easy for him to enter the top 2. It's not a big deal to fight for the champion." Elder Gu Qingyang's eyes moved. At this moment, he did not have much confidence. He knew that there were many powerful people this time. Although he was very clear about his disciple's strength and had even slaughtered martial kings in the Nirvana realm, there were a few abnormal people this time. In particular, the abnormal little demon had returned to the Manchu. Therefore, Elder Gu Qingyang did not have absolute confidence that his disciple would be able to obtain the champion. Moreover, the first round was to face the bronze roll. There were also a few abnormal people on the bronze roll. Perhaps, in the first round, they would snatch the energy bronze amulet from his precious disciple. At that time, he would not even have the chance to enter the top 128, let alone the champion and the top 2. It seems that Elder Gu Qingyang does not have much confidence in his disciple. If that's the case, why don't you give Du Xiaofu to us? Haha. The long-robed elder looked at Elder Gu Qingyang's expression and suddenly laughed. Bullshit. Elder Gu Qingyang did not have any demeanor. He glared at the long-robed elder and said, "Who said that I don't have confidence in my disciple? It's definitely not a problem for him to enter the top 2. Even if it's the champion, I still have a 50% chance." "Is that so?" Hearing this, the long-robed elder secretly smiled. He looked at Elder Qingyang with a faint smile and said, "I don't know if Elder Qingyang is really confident in his disciple or not. How about this? I'll bet 3 king-grade mysterious elixirs with you. As long as Du Xiaofu enters the top 2, Elder Qingyang will win. If Du Xiaofu becomes the champion, I'll lose double. However, if Du Xiaofu doesn't enter the top 2, Elder Qingyang will lose. If he doesn't even enter the top 128, Elder Qingyang will lose double. What do you think?" Elder Qingyang fixed his eyes on the long-robed elder, and the look in his eyes changed secretly. The long-robed elder seemed to be confident and wanted to bet with Elder Qingyang. Seeing that Elder Qingyang seemed to be a little hesitant, he immediately said, "What's wrong? Elder Qingyang, are you still not brave enough to bet? How Zhongwei, didn't you just lose a few king-grade pills to me? I'll fulfill your wish and let you lose even more. I'll accept the bet." Elder Gu Qingyang clenched his teeth and nodded. It was fine to bet. It wasn't like he had no chance of winning. "Hee, then I'll also bet. Elder Qingyang, if you have the ability, continue to win." "Me too. This time, I'll double." "I don't believe it." Seeing this, the surrounding elders, who had lost 4 days ago, seemed to have already discussed this beforehand. Immediately, they surrounded Elder Qingyang, wanting to place their bets. The elders bet more than 4 days ago. It seemed that this time, not only did they want to win back their losses, but they also wanted to win more interest. At this time, Elder Gu Qingyang had no choice but to accept the bet. His expression changed secretly, but he still maintained confidence on his face. This is going to be troublesome. Little junior brother, you have to work hard. If you don't work hard, Master will really go bankrupt this time. Not far away, Yu Wanli stood quietly. Seeing that his master was accepting the bet again, he could only feel helpless. How could Yu Wanli not know his master's temperament and character? He was a typical example of someone who could not be provoked. The provocation was absolutely effective. If he went up to stop him at this time, he might be directly reprimanded. Elder Qingyang, I'll also bet a middle-grade Taoist instrument. At this time, Hu Songkuan could not help but bet. He knew a little about Du Xiaofu's cultivation strength. He had terrifying talent and strength, but this time, there were also a few abnormal people, especially that little demon. What's more, the people on the bronze list were going to go in, so there was a great chance for them to bet now. Can't sleep? Continue to write a chapter. In the morning, I'll post 3 chapters in a row. Asking for flowers, asking for protection. Thank you. Chapter 6:12. I'll bet a mid-grade Dao artifact as well. Elder Chang Mingze couldn't sit still after seeing Elder Hu Songkuan place his bet. Elder Chang Mingze naturally knew that Du Xiaofu was extraordinary. However, he also knew that it would be extremely difficult for Du Xiaofu to enter the top 2 with the presence of several terror overlords. Subsequently, a few elders who were originally with Elder Qiao Mingze and Elder Hu Songkuan seemed to have heard some rumors beforehand. When they saw that Elder Hu Songkuan and Elder Qiao Mingze had already placed their bets, they clenched their teeth and placed their bets one after another as well. Whoosh whoosh, in the distance, the sound of wind breaking could be heard. Many elders stopped placing their bets, and their expressions became serious. Then, they looked in the direction of the sound of wind breaking in front of them. In front of them, many figures flashed and landed in front of the valley. Upon closer inspection, there were a total of 99 figures. Every one of them had a powerful aura. Even the protectors and deacons present weren't inferior to them, especially the 10 figures in front of them. They had an imposing appearance and were extraordinary. In the middle of them, a 25-year-old man stood quietly. His facial features were sharp and handsome as if they were carved by a knife. His entire body exuded an ethereal aura. He looked at Elder Gu Qingyang and the others in front of him and bowed. Greetings, elders and protectors. Ishan of the Bronze Roll is severely injured and can't come with 99 people. Please advise us. Go in. Remember, don't be courteous. Teach those rookies a lesson. The long-robed elder called Hao Zhongwei by Elder Gu Qingyang said loudly. He told the disciples on the bronze list to not be polite when they entered the giant rock space. At that time, Du Xiaofu might not even be able to enter the top 128. Yes, the elegant man nodded. His handsome face revealed a slightly unrestrained smile. Then, his body turned into a ray of light and shot into the entrance of the giant rock space like lightning. Whoosh whoosh, behind him, numerous extraordinary young men and women followed closely behind as their profound energy fluctuated. Soon after, all of them shot into the giant rock space. When the last figure entered the giant rock space, the entrance to the giant rock space began to merge. The entrance disappeared and everything returned to normal. The show is about to begin. Those rookies don't know that entering the inner sect is just the beginning for them. In the future, they'll be crying for their parents, Elder Hu Songkuan said softly, stroking his white beard with interest. They all started out as rookies. Those fellows on the gold roll were also rookies back then. Back then, they were also dealt with in the giant rock space until it was too horrible to look at. Elder Qiao Mingze said softly, only in this way can they become experts as quickly as possible. Elder Gu Qingyang didn't say anything the whole time. He seemed to be silently remembering the total number of bets he had just received. When he was done, his expression changed slightly. The number of bets he had received was astonishing. If he lost, the amount he had won a few days ago wouldn't be enough to compensate for the loss. If he lost twice as much, it would be difficult for him to compensate for it even if he sold his entire fortune. 99 extraordinary figures stood in the gloomy and overcast space. Their auras slowly fluctuated. All of them wore smiles on their faces. A year had passed in the blink of an eye. They finally had the chance to make up for everything they had experienced in the giant rock space a year ago. A young man in his late 20s walked out from the dozen, or so most extraordinary figures. He was wearing white clothes that outlined his sturdy and muscular body. A light green cloak covered his body, giving him a free and easy aura. He looked at the elegant young man in the middle and said, "Emo-chun, how do you want to play? Why don't you say something? Just follow the rules. No matter how we play, they will only be a bunch of rookies. The Munchu only wants us to train these rookies." The elegant young man in the middle said in an indifferent voice, "They are indeed a bunch of rookies. However, we are still short of one person on the bronze board. Ishian has been seriously injured by that kid called Du Xiaofu. This has nothing to do with us. However, it has caused our bronze board to lose quite a bit of face. That Du Xiaofu needs to be properly trained." The man in white clothes said. The pupils on the elegant young man's handsome face slightly moved, after which he said, "Don't go overboard. Du Xiaofu is Elder Qingyang's disciple." "Understood. Let's begin. It's time to take care of those rookies." The man in white clothes smiled, after which he waved his hand. Mysterious aura rippled from the dozen or so figures. They seemed to have transformed into lightning bolts as they instantly shot into the distance. "The game has begun. Rookies, we are here. Have you all hidden properly?" Ha ha! Disdainful laughter reverberated in the surrounding space. Then, one figure after another swept through the air and disappeared into the distance in a flash. Within the gloomy space, rocks and mountain ranges were everywhere. There was no sign of life, and it was a desolate place. Swoosh! Du Xiaofu shot into the air and landed on a giant rock that was dozens of feet tall. Although he did not use his fastest speed, he was confident that he had caught up with most of the people present. Looking around, Du Xiaofu's mental energy spread out. He discovered that there were quite a few auras fluctuating in the distance. All of them seemed to want to stay as far away from the entrance as possible in order to avoid encountering those on the bronze board. Du Xiaofu's eyes narrowed slightly as he looked around. Du Xiaofu did not mind those on the bronze board. It was just that at the entrance, he could not face over 100 experts on the bronze board alone and had no choice but to stay far away. But now that they had spread out, Du Xiaofu was not too worried. At the very least, among the 100 people on the bronze board, those ranked below 30 would not be a threat to him. Moreover, there should not be many people on the bronze board that could threaten him. If it really did not work, Du Xiaofu still had some confidence in his ability to escape. Swoosh, swoosh. In the air in front of him, several figures flew over. They seemed to have seen Du Xiaofu standing on the rock and immediately landed. Du Xiaofu raised his eyebrows and looked over. There were a total of 7 people who landed on the ground. The one in front was a man who looked to be around 23 or 24 years old. He was dressed in a clear blue robe, and under his sword-like eyebrows, his long and narrow eyes were like gurgling spring water. They were as gentle as a spring breeze. The color of his thin lips was slightly light, and the corners of his mouth were slightly raised, making him look noble and unrestrained. The young man sized up Du Xiaofu with an aura of superiority. In his long and narrow eyes, there was a hint of arrogance. Du Xiaofu only glanced at the young man, and then his gaze fell on a woman in her 20s beside the green-robed young man. The woman's skin was not too white, but there was a faint layer of rouge in her healthy yellow skin. It was extremely attractive. Her eyelashes were slightly raised, and her bright eyes were extremely sharp, like a cheetah. The woman's tight, soft armor outlined her exquisite figure, and her slender and straight legs were completely exposed. What caught Du Xiaofu's attention the most was the woman's arms. On each of her wrists, there was a palm-sized scimitar that looked like daggers. There was no doubt that the woman's attire was extremely wild, but her face was extremely alluring. She could be considered as an absolute beauty. At this moment, her eyes were also looking at Du Xiaofu, and there were some fluctuations in them. Beside the woman, there was a young man in long robes. He seemed to be slightly older than the woman. His yellow robes were embroidered with golden patterns as he quietly stood there. He was also very handsome and gave off a noble and elegant feeling. He was also an extraordinary person. Behind the 3 of them, there were 4 other young men standing. They also had an extraordinary aura. Their gazes were all curiously sizing up Du Xiaofu. The first noble and arrogant young man in the middle sized up Du Xiaofu for a while, before he said, "You are the Du Xiaofu who defeated Yixian? What's the matter?" Du Xiaofu glanced at the young man. He could feel that the aura on this young man was extremely extraordinary. He was probably one of the best among the new inner sect disciples who had entered this time. Although his aura was somewhat arrogant, he did have the qualifications to be arrogant. It was just that Du Xiaofu felt a little uncomfortable. The arrogant young man was a little surprised. He looked at Du Xiaofu and said, "I am Su Chuyun. You should have heard of me?" "I don't think so." Du Xiaofu immediately shook his head. He had never heard of this person before. However, from that fellow's tone, he seemed to be able to sense that his reputation in the sect was not low. "You." When he heard Du Xiaofu's words, Su Chuyun's expression immediately became somewhat unnatural. How could he, Su Chuyun, not have heard of him in the Manchu? Could this brat be doing this on purpose? Su Chuyun's good demeanor and arrogance immediately caused his expression to return to normal. He looked at Du Xiaofu and said, "Then let me introduce myself. I am the number 1 in the 3rd region's assessment. Beside me is junior sister Qiao Yingming and junior brother Imo1." Su Chuyun only introduced the 2 people beside him. The 4 young men behind him did not waste any time. They looked at Du Xiaofu and raised their eyebrows as they said, "You are a symbol master. Our group is lacking a symbol master. If you are with us, we won't have to worry too much about those fellows on the bronze rankings. At the very least, we will have the strength to protect ourselves." Chapter 613. Su Chuyun was very clear about Du Xiaofu's strength. He was a talisman master among 6-star talisman masters. Being able to set up a 6-star elementary talisman master and defeating Yixian in one move was enough to prove that he wasn't weak. If he could pull Du Xiaofu into his team, then he would have the confidence to face the people at the top of the bronze ranking. This was also because it was Du Xiaofu. If it was someone else, Su Chuyun wouldn't have personally asked and wouldn't care. If someone too weak joined his team, then they would undoubtedly become a burden. Du Xiaofu felt the aura of the 7 people in front of him. The 4 youths at the back were all at the peak of the martial lord realm. From the aura around Qiao Yingming and Imo1, it was clear that they were at the martial king realm. They probably weren't ordinary martial kings. Su Chuyun's aura was even stronger. If this team met people on the bronze ranking, as long as they weren't the strongest people on the bronze ranking, then they would have the ability to protect themselves. "Forget it. I still like to be alone. You guys should find other talisman masters." Du Xiaofu shook his head. He didn't plan on forming a team. It was good to be alone, and it was convenient. There was no need to form a team. Once he did, it wouldn't be beneficial to him. Hearing Du Xiaofu's rejection, Su Chuyun was slightly stunned and seemed to be surprised. He, Su Chuyun, personally asked, and there was actually someone who rejected him. One had to know that many people wanted to join his team, but he didn't like them and directly rejected them. Now that he had personally spoken, Du Xiaofu had actually rejected him. This made Su Chuyun extremely unhappy in his heart. Qiao Yingming looked up. Her eyelashes were long and curved like a crescent moon. She opened her mouth and said to Du Xiaofu, "Think about it again. Our team does indeed lack a strong talisman master. If you join us, I will also tell you a secret. Perhaps you will be useful in this team." Hearing this, Du Xiaofu looked at Qiao Yingming and said, "What secret? Tell me first. If I think it's worth it, I will consider joining you guys." Qiao Yingming hesitated for a moment and said, "There are a total of 7 regions in this giant rock space. Every night, there will be changes in the 7 regions. At that time, the 7 regions will overlap with each other, and so it's useless no matter how far we run now. We will still meet the people on the bronze ranking. So it's better to find a place to hide in first." Qiao Yingming, Qiao Yingming, Qiao Xiaofu, Qiao Yingming, Qiao Yingming, Qiao Yingming didn't was to Yiming's. Du Xiaofu then smiled and said to Qiao Yingming, "Thank you for this secret. You should find a place to hide and preserve your strength." Meng Yu. Qiao Yingming looked at Du Xiaofu. Under her long eyelashes, she stared at Du Xiaofu. "I said I would consider, but I didn't say for sure. Your information isn't enough for me to join you guys." Du Xiaofu said. You lied to me. You don't keep your word. Xiao Ming stared fixedly at Du Xiaofu. The aura emanating from her exquisite figure also began to become sharp. Her small mouth slightly pouted, and her body automatically adjusted into a half-defensive state when facing anger. Her figure seemed even more graceful and elegant, with curves in all the right places. This woman had the wildness of a cheetah, but also the beauty of a cheetah. She was extremely tempting. I made myself very clear. I'm only considering, but I won't join you guys for sure. Du Xiaofu smiled faintly. This woman was clearly very wild, but her name was Ming. It gave people a misconception. Junior sister Ming, forget it. Some people think they've climbed up a branch and have protection outside. Why bother with this kind of person? When the time comes, we won't even know how we'll be taught a lesson. Su Chuyun glanced at Du Xiaofu with hatred in her eyes. However, she knew that this wasn't the time to make a move. It wouldn't be long before the people of the bronze leaderboard were everywhere. The most important thing now was to find a place to hide. Look at you. You have delicate features. I didn't expect you to be such a shameless person. Xiao Ming glared at Du Xiaofu. Her gaze wasn't any better. Her curvaceous figure trembled slightly as she said in a deep voice, "How dare you lie to me? I'll settle the score with you later." On the other hand, the young man called Mo and stood quietly without saying a word. Whoosh whoosh, after glaring at Du Xiaofu with hatred in their eyes, the 7 people left under Su Chuyun's lead. Watching the 7 of them leave, Du Xiaofu did not mind at all. He did not take it to heart. The 7 areas will overlap and change every night. Why do I have to run? After muttering softly, Du Xiaofu searched the surroundings, and in the end, he found an extremely concealed small cave within a valley that was large enough to accommodate him. He sat down cross-legged and closed his eyes to rest his mind. Du Xiaofu estimated that he would pass the test as long as he hid and didn't come out during the 7 days in the giant rock space and kept the energy copper talisman on him. In the gloomy giant rock space, there wasn't any vitality or green vegetation. It was difficult to hide. Figures rushed through the space, trying to avoid the plundering of the experts on the bronze leaderboard. The 7 days in the giant rock space wasn't just a test. 3 months of energy copper talismans were also necessary to enter the ancient bronze space. If they were stolen by the experts on the bronze leaderboard, they would only be able to stay in the ancient bronze space for 10 days. Therefore, no matter what, for these newly promoted inner sect disciples, they definitely couldn't allow the experts on the bronze leaderboard to steal their energy copper talismans. Whoosh whoosh, in midair, 12 figures quickly flew past. Their auras were chaotic and their expressions were hurried. Rookies, you can't run. Hand over the energy copper talismans. Otherwise, you'll be asking for trouble. Behind the 12 people, 9 figures quickly chased after them. Their speed was much faster than the 12 people in front of them. After a few flashes, they surrounded the 12 people in mid-air. Be careful, let's work together to resist. Among the 12 people, there was a youth in yellow who had a serious expression. However, when he looked at the 9 youths in front of him, who were about the same age as him, he slightly gritted his teeth. He didn't think that he didn't have the ability to fight. Being able to become a newly promoted inner sect disciple and being one of the best among them, he had his own pride. However, when the 11 people around the youth in yellow heard him, they immediately formed a circle. At this moment, their faces started to turn pale. They looked at the 9 people approaching with fear in their eyes. Rookies, it seems like you don't intend to hand over your energy copper talismans. That's exactly what I want. Otherwise, it won't be fun. Among the 9 people chasing after them, a youth revealed a smile on his face. His smile didn't seem to care. Let's fight. It's time to train these rookies. A tall and sturdy youth laughed out loud. He was very excited. Profound chi surged and symbols flew out, forming a bright light. Like a storm, it directly suppressed the 12 new inner sect disciples. None of the 12 inner sect disciples were weak. They were all geniuses from the outside world. However, the experts on the bronze roll were the cream of the crop among the previous batch of inner sect disciples. Generally speaking, they would have cultivated for a longer period of time. They had also cultivated in the ancient bronze space for a year. Their cultivation bases were much higher than those of the new inner sect disciples. Bang, bang, bang. Low-energy muffled sounds were heard. Even though the new inner sect disciples were extraordinary, under the suppression of the copper-ranking experts, they didn't have much strength to resist. In a short period of time, they were directly defeated. Bang! One of the youths on the bronze board punched the chest of the leader of the new inner sect disciples, the yellow-robed youth, causing his body to fall from mid-air to the ground, smashing into a pile of rocks, causing the rubble to fly everywhere. Poochie! The youth in yellow spat out a mouthful of blood. His face turned pale, and the extraordinary symbol sword in his hand fell to the ground. He struggled for a while but couldn't get up. Instead, he spat out a large amount of blood on the ground. The youth on the copper ranking landed in front of the youth in yellow. He slightly waved his fist and said with disdain in his eyes, "If you don't want to be taught a lesson, hand over the energy copper talismans. Otherwise, I don't mind breaking a few of your bones." The youth in yellow's face was extremely ugly. His eyes were faintly red. However, he could only grit his teeth and form a hand seal. Then, dazzling symbols flew out from his badge. In the end, 8 red talismans the length of an adult's palm and the width of 2 fingers appeared in the hands of the youth in yellow. The badge on his shoulder also emitted a red light. You should have handed it over earlier. Don't think that you can be arrogant just because you're an inner sect disciple. In front of the copper ranking, if you don't want to be taught a lesson, it's better to be honest. The youth on the copper ranking unceremoniously kept the 8 energy copper talismans into the badge on his chest. A faint smile appeared on his face, as if this was how it should be. Then, the other 11 new inner sect disciples had no choice but to obediently hand over the energy copper talismans on their bodies. The energy copper talismans of the 12 inner sect disciples were divided among the 9 copper ranking experts. Each of them lay on the ground with wounds all over their bodies, but they were powerless. Chapter 6:14. Originally, these newly promoted inner sect disciples were all prideful. However, at this moment, they were no longer prideful. Sigh, what kind of rule is this? They actually want one person to stay for 10 days. If they take all of them away, we can exchange them for energy silver talismans. We did the same in the past. This is just the beginning. If we find more rookies, we can exchange them for a lot of energy silver talismans. There are many rookies in front. Let's continue to fix them. The 9 of them had disdainful looks on their faces. Then, they turned around and left. Large pieces of rocks formed a messy stone plaza. The surroundings were empty. Over 30 people gathered together. Their profound chi surged and their weapons were unsheathed. The air around them vibrated and rippled. Among the 30 people, there were both men and women. Their auras were not weak, especially the leader of the group, a young man with a rough body. Under his tight clothes, the muscles on his body looked as if they were going to burst out of his clothes. He looked extremely powerful. The aura of this young man was also extremely powerful. He was at the peak of the complete martial lord realm and even had some king realm aura. At this moment, there were a total of 7 young men standing in front of the 30 people. The 7 young men all had extraordinary auras. When they looked at the 30 young men and women in front of them, they smiled. "Are you the people on the bronze board?" The rough young man looked at the 7 young men in front of him. They had the same badge on their shoulders. However, they were not newly promoted inner sect disciples. They should be the so-called experts on the bronze board. Correct. Among the 7 young men, one of them had a clean and white face. He had thick eyebrows and a tall nose. He was extremely handsome. He looked at the rough young man and said, "Are you going to hand over the energy bronze talismans, or will you hand them over after I teach you a lesson?" "Haha, I know that you are on the bronze board. However, there are only 7 of you. There are 32 of us. Do you think that you can defeat us?" The boorish young man immediately laughed heartily when he heard this. Although he was a little wary of the people on the bronze ranking, when he saw that some of the people on the bronze ranking were around the same age as him, and that there were a total of 32 of them, it was almost 5 against 1. The fear in his heart was greatly reduced, and he could not help but feel a little more confident. 32, haha. Hearing the boorish young man's words, several of the 7 people could not help but laugh. At this moment, anyone could feel that the smiles on their faces were a kind of faint contempt, as if they were mocking him. Hearing the laughter of the few young men on the bronze roll, the expressions of the 32 people changed slightly. All right, just hand over the energy copper talisman and scram. With your cultivation base, you're not qualified for us to fix you. The handsome young man with the smooth and fair face said to the rough young man indifferently. Boastful words. Shame. The boorish young man shouted in a deep voice. 5 against 1. They still had some confidence. All of them were extraordinary people. How could they be so easily scared and ridiculed like this? This was clearly an insult to them. Chi, however, before the boorish young man could finish his sentence, a figure had already appeared in front of him like a ghost. The speed was beyond his imagination, and a fist landed on his chest like a meteorite. Boom! A low and deep muffled sound was emitted, causing the space to suddenly tremble, after which the rough-looking young man's body directly flew backwards. At the same time, a large mouthful of fresh blood was spat out from his mouth. Wherever his body passed, the surrounding 30-plus young men and women were directly sent flying one after another under this frightening impact. Poochie poochie, one by one, the young men and women were sent flying backwards and smashed onto the ground. Large pieces of rock were turned into dust, and each of them spat out blood. The most miserable was still the boorish young man. His body landed on the ground, causing countless pieces of rock to fly up. Dust filled the air, and his face was as pale as ash. Blood dripped from the corner of his mouth. He struggled a few times, but was unable to get up. Goo goo! When the remaining dozen people saw this scene, they all sucked in a breath of cold air. Their eyes were filled with horror. At this moment, how would these newly promoted inner sect disciples dare to make a move? The strength of the handsome young man was actually so powerful. Under the crowd's gazes, the handsome young man walked out and calmly walked to the side of the boorish young man who was unable to get up. At this moment, the handsome young man's face, which was full of smiles, had already turned slightly fierce. He mercilessly stepped on the boorish young man's chest, like a cat looking at a mouse in front of it. He said in an indifferent voice, "Don't tell me that the cultivation of a half-king is your backing. Even if you have the opportunity to step into the martial king realm in the future, I can still easily trample on you 1,000 times over." As his voice rang out, the handsome young man slightly raised his head and looked around. He said in an indifferent voice, "A bunch of people who don't know their own strength. Hand over the energy copper talismans, or else you will be properly taught a lesson." The surrounding newly promoted inner sect disciples trembled. A wise man knows better than to fight when the odds are against him. The young man's cultivation was simply too powerful. Not to mention that there were 32 of them. Even if there were 120 of them, they would still be taught a lesson. How would they dare to resist? One by one, they obediently handed over the energy copper talismans. In the end, the boorish young man also handed over the 8 energy copper talismans on his body while his eyes were filled with shock. At this moment, he finally understood what it meant to be an expert on the copper roll. A few days ago, Du Xiaofu, who was also a new inner sect disciple, had heavily injured Yi Xian, who was ranked within the top 30 of the copper roll, with a single move. Therefore, in his opinion, the people on the copper roll were only SOSO. At this moment, the boorish young man finally understood that it was not that the people on the copper roll were weak, but that Du Xiaofu was just too strong. It was a pity that he was not Du Xiaofu. All right, let's go. We'll leave these rookies for them to deal with. Among the 7 people, a handsome and elegant young man, who had been standing in the middle, indifferently raised his head and looked at the dusky sky. On his handsome face, there was a slight, unrestrained smile. His eyes were filled with some anticipation as he said in an indifferent voice, "It's going to be dark soon." It's said that among these rookies, there are 4 human kings and 11 elites. Dealing with them should be more fun than dealing with these rookies. That makes sense. It should be more fun to deal with these rookies. The few young men nodded with a smile. Subsequently, their figures flashed and disappeared in a few flashes. In the dusky space, the sky gradually turned darker and darker. In the end, It was completely dark. Only a faint moonlight illuminated the space, but no stars could be seen. Bang, bang, bang. In the dark night, there would occasionally be low-energy sonic booms in the surrounding space. However, they only lasted for a short period of time before calming down. In the small cave, Du Xiaofu, who was sitting cross-legged, slightly opened his eyes. The light in his eyes was bright and deep in the dark night. After that, Du Xiaofu closed his eyes again and began to rest. Everything that happened outside had nothing to do with him. It was fine as long as no one disturbed him. Bang, bang, bang. Low-energy sonic booms reverberated, as if night had fallen. More and more new inner sect disciples were plundered by the experts on the bronze list. Faint cries for their parents could be heard, indicating that some of them had been dealt with extremely miserably. Time passed slowly, and the surrounding noises gradually calmed down. It should be because most of the new inner sect disciples had been plundered, and the experts on the bronze roll had gradually left. Rumble. Suddenly, the entire giant rock space trembled. The rumbling sound seemed to come from the depths of the earth. The earth shook and the mountains swayed. An inexplicable aura spread out from the trembling space. Rumble. After that, the entire space seemed to be moving. The entire ground shook and rocks rolled down. The cave was on the verge of collapsing. Is the space overlapping and changing? In the cave, Du Xiaofu suddenly opened his eyes and his figure instantly flew out of the cave. Walala. In the space, an inexplicable aura fluctuated. It made one's heart tremble. The ground shook and the mountains shook. The space rippled. When Du Xiaofu flew out of the cave, he was surprised to find that he was still at the side of the hidden cave. However, the surrounding terrain and space had already changed. It was no longer the same place. Swoosh, swoosh. At this moment, a few figures mysteriously appeared in the sky above Du Xiaofu. Haha, this newbie must have been scared silly. He must have hidden well yesterday. He didn't expect to meet us. Loud laughter could be heard. There were a total of 10 figures. The 10 of them were all extraordinary youths. They were all around the age of 20 to 24 or 25. The 10 of them had an extremely powerful aura. Looking at Du Xiaofu, a malicious smile appeared on their faces. This newbie is actually alone. Don't tell me he was scared silly. Haha. A sturdy young man in short clothes looked at Du Xiaofu with interest. After laughing out loud, he looked at Du Xiaofu, raised his eyebrows, and said jokingly, "Brat, quickly hand over the copper energy talisman so that I don't have to make a move. Otherwise, I'll teach you a lesson first, and then you'll still have to hand over the copper energy talisman." Hearing this, Du Xiaofu immediately looked at the 10 youths in front of him. His gaze swept across them. Among the 10 of them, there were 9 who had just reached the Martial King realm. There was also one who was at the peak of the Martial Lord realm and had a Martial King realm aura. Today is Thanksgiving Day. Xiaoyu is here to express his gratitude. I'm grateful to my parents and everything around me. It makes me feel happy. I'm grateful that I don't have anything around me. It makes me know who I am. I'm especially grateful to my brothers and sisters. I'm grateful for everyone's support. It's because of everyone's love and support that I can write books to make money and support my family. My interest and work are one. This is definitely a happy thing. I'm grateful to everyone. It's the end of the month. I'm shamelessly rolling on the ground begging for flowers again. On the 30th, Xiaoyu exploded. It was not a small explosion. It was definitely a super explosion.